This could be incredibly damaging. People could cancel her
Oh
because
no.
she'll find out what kind of radical man that she's married to.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the dialogue. Now, folks, before we get going, I want to speak to something that's incredibly near and dear to my heart. I have done extensive market analysis on podcasts, and I have found that there's a direct correlation between a podcast's importance and relevance and its low voltage lights in the background. And after spending minutes of rummaging through my junk drawer, have thereby ensured that this podcast will be relevant for days ahead. Secondly, you'll note that the title of this podcast has the word tavern in it. As I sort of experiment with this new medium, sort of two categories emerge from my head. There could be more. The first is more of like a storytelling, narrative-like podcast, like with my friend Paul last week. And I do have a couple more of those in the works, and I look forward to those. And the second is what this is, which is more of what I think is a traditional podcast, which is sort of musing for times, and half a time. Or a conversation that one might have at a tavern, for example, hence the name. Which is very apropos for today's episode because we didn't plan it this way, but behind my headshot, there's some alcohol on the shelf. We didn't drink any. It was 10 in the morning. Today's episode is with my longtime friend, Jeff Barrett. He is a business owner and a contractor at metricpdx.com. In today's conversation, we talk about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and how it relates to Christian ethics. I guarantee you probably haven't heard a conversation quite like it before. In the last third of the podcast, we talk about cancel culture, or specifically cancel culture in the church and how it relates to maybe celebrity pastors, if there were ever such a thing. Lastly, this episode is narcissistically sponsored by yours truly. Now, folks, at some point you may want to buy or sell a property in the Portland metro area, and you could use your wife's cousin's uncle twice removed, and that would be cool. Or you could support the podcast by going to anderson37.com. I'm just putting that out there. That's all for now. Now on to the show. So you saw the name of the podcast is, well, first of all, I also realized the videos helped me have better posture.
Oh, okay.
Because I do like this, and I'm like, oh, that isn't the most attractive thing in the world. So I'm trying to have better, and you think you...
I think the most attractive thing in the world for social media has proven is just to be yourself.
That's true. But I think...
But you can improve yourself and then be a more attractive yourself.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay,
That's
there you
what
go.
I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So the name of the podcast is Regular Dialogue, which is... the analogy I use is it's taking social media hopefully to its where it was intended, not where it's going, but where it's intended to be. So if you've ever read the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, that's sort of what social media has become.
Right.
But I think when we say the word social media, we think social. And the intent of this podcast is to sort of commoditize a podcast. That is to take what is, big names and sort of bring it down to the everyday person. That now that technology is ubiquitous and cheap enough that we can have conversations to try to reclaim the ground of what maybe social media was supposed to be. So the name of this podcast, the working title until I can come up with a better name.
So I can't show my cat photos here?
You could, if that's part of the dialogue. If you want to go through your cat photos and show what a lame person you are,
Okay.
You could do that. So the name of the podcast is Regular Dialogue. Just it's not supposed to be this. It doesn't have to be this pontificated where we say something really profound, but it can just be a conversation where people can join in or not join in. So that's sort of the.
So I have options here?
Sure.
Okay.
So I thought you would be interested. I thought you would be an interesting person to talk to because you have some, we'll call them non-conventional views on money, but also Bitcoin, which I know that's a very fiery topic right now. But I think one of the things about any tribal camp, whether it's Republican versus Democrat or Windows versus PC or Bitcoin versus gold, I don't know what the alternative is people get in these camps and they start hearing the apologetics on their side of the camp, and they just have these blind spots and they don't see they can't see the blind spots. And I think the other thing is about what I think would be interesting to talk to you is, I thought of a good analogy, which is, like in the Bible it says, if you think you see, I'm paraphrasing, but if you think you see, you're blind. And a secular analogy is there's a book called The Black Swan. It's written by Nicola Taleb, and it's this idea that what happens, these external events, whether it's 9/11 or something, that they always come from the blind side. They always come from where we're not looking. And it's funny because, and we're talking about Bitcoin at the beginning, is the people who are pro-Bitcoin, they're like so certain, and they have their talking points, and they can't. Well, first of all, they're not seeing the whole picture. They're not opening their aperture wide, and maybe that's just human nature. Maybe there's no way of getting away from that. But also, it's an inherently technical debate, right? So Bitcoin is obviously
about Bitcoin is inherently technical,
right? Well, it's
from a certain perspective, it is
a certain perspective,
but that's where maybe my perspective is less widely thought of.
Okay. Well, so what problems do you have with Bitcoin?
Well, when Bitcoin first became an idea, it already fit into a category that I already have in my overall ethics on fiscal responsibility, ideas of what being a disciple of Christ means for a person living in this culture monetarily, so on and so forth. So it quickly for me fell right into that category. And in addition to that, as you know, I have a fairly technical background. I'm not a computer genius, but a lot of self-taught computer skills and time working in the computer industry, software industry, and the technologies behind Bitcoin. There are people who can explain them far better than I can, and I don't want to sit here and try to make a video that explains how Bitcoin exactly works. That's been done more effectively than I can explain it.
Right.
But I do think that I have enough understanding about it to basically understand how it works, in the sense of the way a mechanic can tell you how a car works without knowing the physics of combustion or the exact science behind engineering your airflow sensor and all these very, very technical things. I at least know the way that Bitcoin basically works.
Right.
And knowing the way it basically works means that if we start on the technological side, you said the debate's largely technical, I have very little confidence in it.
I probably misspoke. A large percentage of it is technical because
Sure.
it deals with computer science.
Right.
It deals with cryptography.
Right. Cryptography.
Yeah.
So dealing with cryptography, encryption, hashing, all these different jargons that'll be thrown around. I have very low confidence in Bitcoin as what it purports to be. Just as low a confidence in Bitcoin as any other cryptocurrency or NFTs, all these other.
So why is your confidence low?
So from a technical standpoint, I basically understand that Bitcoin is a branding of...
cryptocurrency, yes.
Bitcoin is a branding.
Correct.
Bitcoin is a branding of essentially, basically 3 technologies. You have a content revision system, like Git or other software repositories, or you might think of like Time Machine on your Mac OS. These are content revisioning systems. You have basically torrent file sharing technology involved. And then you have cryptography or encryption, like MD checksums and things like this. All kinds of different versions of people's attempt to encrypt some type of data. And if the question of what is a Bitcoin has been asked and answered many times online, but essentially a Bitcoin is one number which operated on by another number equals a third number. That's all it is. And by definition, it is not unique. It cannot be unique. So just like with any digital data, it can be duplicated. It is fungible. However, so compare it to tangible currency. So if I'm holding a coin, I have this coin, and by the laws of physics, no one else has the coin.
Right.
It is one object of mass in one location at one time. Quantum physicists can argue with me, but I have a coin. If I have a quote-unquote Bitcoin, I don't actually have anything. Parts of my storage media are arranged in a certain way because I have a Bitcoin in my wallet somehow.
Yeah.
And that is synchronized with parts of other people's storage media being arranged in the same way.
Right.
And I don't have anything. What I have, if I have a Bitcoin, is I have a membership or an entry in a distributed log,
Right.
called the blockchain, right?
Which is one of the strengths of it, because that's what the people who are pro Bitcoin would say. Like the strength of it is
Right.
that there's accountability.
Right.
That's why you can't manipulate it, because it's
Right.
public.
Right, but this gets us then into what it is in its essence and how should, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to say that I have insight into telling you if you put your money in Bitcoin, you're going to go broke, it's going to crash, or you should definitely do it, you're going to make a lot of money. That's not even my angle. I'm just trying to think of it in terms of what's important to me, which is I consider myself a disciple of Christ. I'm trying to follow Christ and interact with the world around me the way I'm being led to, and I have to respond to these things from that paradigm. So first, technologically recognizing what Bitcoin is, I think I understand it fairly well, and therefore I have a low confidence in the item itself. And then I have a low confidence also in paper money,
Right.
right? In a very similar
lower.
way.
Would you have a lower confidence in fiat currency?
Well, they're both fiat currency, but that's something for me to. So.
Because that's one of the biggest arguments.
Yeah. So I do have low confidence in fiat currency for sure. Yeah, just by definition.
But you consider them equally low, because what people who are pro cryptocurrency would say is it's way lower. Like, fiat currency is way lower on the. It's way more foolish, because.
I understand the argument, but I don't quite want to answer that question until we get into more a less technical side of how I respond to Bitcoin and more of a discipleship side from a Christian perspective. So just speaking purely technically, and is this a stable platform? Is being in the registry, in the blockchain, a reliable positioning? Could it be corrupted? I don't think it's a great system. You maybe have heard the term of a 51% attack on the blockchain could corrupt it, and
Which it would take a bad actor to do that. You would need some
necessarily
to get 51%.
Not necessarily, because take for example, countries like China, North Korea, Iran.
Well, that's what I mean. Like countries that have.
Wait, let me finish. And maybe the U.S. Any of these countries, which, whether we admit it or not, are actually controlling the hardware that we operate on for internet. Yeah. The question is, for a 51% attack to happen, there has to be a 51% corruption in the network that I'm participating in. So if the controlling members of the network reduce the network size, all of a sudden 51% of a smaller network is not a very large amount.
Right.
So if I'm a network among 3 people, only 2 people had to get corrupted before the data is corrupted. And in the case of those countries running, behind their national firewalls, all these kinds of things, the network can easily become fragmented. And in the case of whatever it may be, a war, an actual war, a data war, an info war.
Right.
These countries have been proven they do censor data, direct traffic the way they choose to, and that's going to affect how my software interacts with the network on my computer. So all of a sudden, it may be that for years I've had my Bitcoin wallet interacting with 2/3 of the world's population, and unbeknownst to me, all of a sudden it's only interacting with 55% of the world's population, and then 45%, and because countries are fragmenting the network.
You know, it's interesting you say that because, from my understanding, the invention of the internet, was funded by our government. The intent behind the invention of the internet was a way of sharing data. So that if like someone nukes Chicago, that presumably you'll have to rebuild the city, and if you just killed all the architects and the civil engineers, you can disseminate information. That was the intent, to be robust and to share resources, so that if a state actor takes down part of that you can rebuild quicker with the exchange of information. The irony in that, and you made a point that a lot of what we're assuming that call it the robustness of cryptocurrency is based, at least Bitcoin, and they're the easiest to use, of this ledger, that if it only works if the network is working. And I know that there's one, a lot of people, there's a lot of people that hypothesize that if someone were to be nefarious, another state, for example, if you took out the network, so our phones don't work, the internet doesn't work, that would basically a Bitcoin would be worthless because you can't access the ledger at that point.
Sure. And yeah, so it relies on the fidelity of your network connection.
Right. Not alone the firewall, because you brought up the firewall, but I just mean...
But here's maybe I should be more clear about the firewall idea. So let's take a country like Venezuela. It's been a lot of uproar. Say 5 years ago you were in Venezuela and you were participating in Bitcoin, and then all of a sudden Venezuela locks down their internet connection to just the country.
Yeah.
Now you have Bitcoin's still working just fine as far as the software functionality of it. But now you have two separate streams. Venezuela has their own stream, unless people are circumnavigating the firewall, and the ledgers are going to become disparate. And if the networks realign and become a network again, there will be a disagreement.
And there will be, one will have inflation, like a fiat for currency.
One person will say this one's mine, another person will say no, that one's mine. And
that's even worse
than
the
fiat. Both
yeah.
are in a bad situation because the ledger's fragmented. So the fragmentation of the ledger, the corruption of it through that means doesn't require that the software that does the calculations and maintains the ledger fails. It just requires that it gets put into a different container.
Right.
So I can sit here in America and say, oh, I'm confident that I'll always be in the majority portion of the world's network. Yeah. Therefore, my ledger is secure. Well, whatever. If you're going to participate in a system like that, technologically, just understand what you're doing.
Well, and one of the things that I don't like about, on my understanding of cryptocurrency, at least of Bitcoin, is it's not autonomous. So for instance, if I have a $20 bill in my pocket, no one knows I have the $20 bill in my pocket. But if I have $20 in my savings account...
Except for the newer, larger bills that supposedly have NFT tracking on them.
Stop it. It's not true yet. Right, so we'll take fiat currency or even a bar of gold. It's mine, and it's like... a great analogy, you go to the grocery store, it says lock, take, hide. So like if you put your valuables under the seat before you go to Walmart, obviously if you put the stuff under the seat while you're at Walmart and you close the door, then potentially someone can see you do that and know there's something valuable. But you do it beforehand, so ignorance is bliss. So the money in my pocket, even though it's being obliterated by the Fed printing money, it's autonomous. I have the... And Bitcoin is not that way. It's not private. And one of the things that I thought was really... So I had an economics professor that made a point that years ago, it stuck with me. He said, where money goes, control goes. And so do we think so one of the things about Bitcoin, or the people who are pro-Bitcoin, is they're like, well, it's bad that the government has all this control that they can just print money. I agree with that. But do we think that they're just going to let just us not pay taxes on the money, or us remove the money, that we pay each other in Bitcoin? If we pay each other via Venmo or PayPal, then presumably at some point the government can step in and tax that. But they're just going to lie on the most powerful agencies in the universe are just going to lay back and just let that money be. And the fact that it's not autonomous, it's very easy. It's sort of like the analogy of gun owners use. Like if you have a registration, then they can go and they know where to pick up the guns. Right. And it's the same analogy with Bitcoin. It's like, it's not, principally I agree with some of the arguments of the people who are pro-Bitcoin, but it's not autonomous, which means state actors, and you can see like China. The irony is Chinese citizens cannot own Bitcoin. Right. But the government of China, from this article that...
Well, let's say that Chinese citizens, quote unquote, owning Bitcoin, which is already a misnomer in itself, is statedly prohibited in China. We shouldn't say they can't own it. We should say it's statedly prohibited.
But if you own a Bitcoin, you're on the ledger. So
unless you own it anonymously or through a pseudonym. But own it.
Right.
Your name's on the list.
Right.
Imagine if Bitcoin could be compared to an analogy of if I had a clipboard and it had 10 slots on it, and I went around saying, you want to put your name in one of my slots? And I'll take number 2. All right, $20, you got number 2. Your name's on number 2. Yeah. And then you go over to someone else and say, I got number 2. My name's on number 2. And the person's like, man, I wish I was number 2 on Jeff's list. And like, well, I'll sell you number 2 for $30. And then someone gives you $30, and then you tell me I sold my number 2 to him, and I'm like, oh, scratch out your name now. Number 2 has his name on it. That's essentially what's going on with blockchain. Right.
And what you would say, and I would agree from a technical standpoint, like the blockchain you have a coin, it's just an encryption. An encryption, the people who are pro-Bitcoin, they're really quick to say this. It's never been hacked. It's never been hacked that we know of. Yeah. Therefore, and that's true, right? Because if there was a way to manufacture gold in a way that was passable by jewelers, right, then that would deflate the value of gold, right? Because
the idea that Bitcoin's never been hacked is, I think it's I shouldn't be the authority on this. A really responsible journalist should investigate this, but in my impression and from the reports I've seen, I think it has been quote unquote hacked. Bitcoin goes through, I think it's called an SHA-256 encryption twice.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty secure. I mean,
so it's a very So imagine you're using to put this in maybe simple terms. You're using a number between 0 and 2 to the 256 power minus 1 times 0 to 2 to 256 power minus 1. That's how many possible numbers. So it's already an unnamably large number. Yeah. Is the range of mathematical multiplications that are happening on whatever you're encrypting. So who's going to devote the amount of processing power it would take to decrypt something like that when you already don't even know that you're decrypting the right piece of information you want? Right. So it seems like an impossibly hard task to decrypt that. Now, 256K bit encryption has been broken when someone knew they had the data they wanted and could just devote exact time right to it. And then there have been discrepancies in the blockchain, which have had to be resolved. So has Bitcoin been hacked? Well, the majority has continued to rule in the blockchain, and 256-bit encryption has been hacked. Has Bitcoin been hacked? I don't know. I mean, it depends on how you want to present it. Right. So has anyone in the world ever raised a flag and said, I've been wronged by Bitcoin, I have some type of record saying I should have this, and the majority vote against me and say I don't have it? Has that ever happened? A journalist should look into that. Yeah. That wouldn't mean Bitcoin is even hacked. That could happen, like I said, with fragmenting of the network and disparate streams of the blockchain. Right. But again, that's all just in the technical side of it.
And going back to
so can I plug another podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Computer File. The Computer File podcast out of the UK. Excellent, best videos on Bitcoin for anybody who wants to kind of understand the technology of it in a way better explanation than I can give. Look up anything about Bitcoin on Computer File.
Well, you were talking about the clipboard analogy a moment ago. I thought, so Dave Ramsey talks about, he hates gold. Yeah. And one of the reasons he hates gold, and I thought this was an interesting point, that I think people that, even if you disagree with him, because I do think, you should always try and listen to people who are smart on the other side, even if you're like, I'm not going to lock so, it doesn't mean I have to wholesale agree with them. But and I thought he made an interesting point that I've thought about, which is that gold is a speculative asset. In other words, it's not directly, but let's just say for the sake of argument, it's directly correlated to the fear of inflation. It's not correlated to inflation, it's correlated to the fear of inflation, or the lack of fear of inflation. And right now, you just see this parabolic shift with the price of Bitcoin, except recently, the last couple of weeks. Because because right now, the government is just printing, the amount of money that, at least in the United States, we've printed is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I saw a headline that said something like there was going to be a $100 million spending bill to fund an agency to investigate the cause of inflation.
Yeah, it's Babylon Bee.
Oh,
yeah, the Babylon
Bee
yeah.
got me again.
It's going to send. We're going to spend $3 trillion to figure out where which is interesting because that doesn't mean. So let's say I'm spitballing here, but let's say inflation is 3%. Okay, now Bitcoin is at 6%.
6%. What?
Okay.
Inflation or 6% appreciation?
Six. Okay. Let me start an analogy over again. Let's say that inflation has gone up 3% year over year, and Bitcoin and gold have gone up 6%. And people say, well, it's a hedge against inflation, except that it's beating inflation by. So that margin, because you're going from 3% to 6%, that the difference is, the delta is 3%.
Well, let's just...
Well, hold on, let me finish my analogy.
Go ahead.
So in this analogy, some would say, and I would tend to agree, that people that are so quick to throw their money towards assets that are inflation hedges, like real estate, for example, and I'll talk about that in a second because it's something that's near and dear to my heart, let's say inflation is 3%, but people are so afraid of inflation that they push these assets to 6, 7, 8, and 9%. Well, the delta is now 6%, meaning it's beating inflation by more than inflation. So it's, even if inflation is really high, that delta is fear. It's not rational. In other words, that delta is what we say, it's a speculative asset, meaning it's inflating the numbers. And so everyone says, like right now, everyone's buying real estate because they're afraid of the government printing money as another hedge against inflation that Bitcoin is one of. But it's pushed so beyond what actual inflation is, that it becomes bubbly. It becomes prone to crashes or corrections.
Right. So to respond to some of your points there, one, I think it's helpful to speak in more direct and revealing terms about the math of the economics there. So when we say inflation goes up, we mean the value of the dollar went down.
Right.
So if we have a
gallon of milk or
static asset here and it's worth $100 and the value of dollar goes down by 3%, now this asset's worth $103,
right,
but it's the same thing. And your dollar before, $100 was now worth $97 and whatever, blah, blah, roughly. So dollar value goes down, Bitcoin goes up, means Bitcoin has stayed the same. If Bitcoin goes up to a greater degree than the dollar is going down, and you're saying that delta there is fear, I think that's reductionistic because you're only viewing the delta from one of the benefits of owning that asset.
Well, agreed. And yes.
So let's say that the value of the dollar is going up. Let's say it's going up by 2% over a year. So it's deflation. And Bitcoin's still going up higher than that 5% over the year.
Yeah.
Why would that be? Well, possible incentives of Bitcoin, maybe avoiding taxes,
right? Maybe
international transactions, maybe black market transactions. Yeah. So there's lots of incentives to participate in Bitcoin besides just avoiding a negative.
I am agreeing with you, and I think I was just poking a hole in the argument that it's solely based upon it's like the inverse image of inflation, which isn't true. You can't just say it's just the opposite of inflation,
right?
Because there's we'll take real estate for example. So when the world shut down 18 months ago, it was really clear that people became home-centric because they're doing home offices, homeschooling. So the value of real estate went up dramatically because we had to do a lot more on the property. So that it wasn't, I've said before, I think that people were hoarding property like toilet paper, in the way that you couldn't find toilet paper in the beginning of the pandemic. They're just like, I can't. But it wasn't just, I do think it was part of it, that they were like, well, if I'm going to have a prison, I might as well have a nice prison. And so they were hoarding these, not hoarding, but people who would otherwise sell are holding on to them.
Right.
But to your point, like, it did add, there were other things that needed to do. And I think you're right, like the demand for maybe illicit activity, the demand for, I heard a great analogy of like when people were fleeing, I think it was either Soviet Union or Germany during the run up to World War II, is like they would sew pieces of gold into their clothing. And the advantage of Bitcoin is you just have to remember a 16 word password, and assuming they don't torture you, that if you go on an airplane, you cross borders, you have to fill out this form that say, do you have more than $10,000 of fiat currency? And so you can sort of remove those boundaries, but it's not perfect. But yeah, they're not. Yeah, so it does a lot of things.
Yeah, lots of incentives for why people would participate in it. So before, like, I don't really have a lot to say about the financial planning or economic side of Bitcoin. Like I said, from the technical side, I think I understand it fairly well, and therefore I kind of look at it askew and go, it's just the currently most sophisticated, or there's lots of different cryptocurrencies, but they're among the most sophisticated forms of encryption and crowdsourced cloud data storage we have. So therefore, it's holding up for a while in the integrity of its record for most people participating.
Would you say, this may be opening a can of worms that I'm not sure if I want to go into yet, but like someone who's diversifying their profile is saying, it would be unwise to put all of your money into crypto.
Right.
But to diversify, which is a biblical idea.
Okay. I really want to get to the biblical.
I know you do, and we'll get there. But there's still a little meat off the bone I want to talk about with crypto. I do. We'll put a pin in that.
Put a pin in it.
Put a pin in that.
Yeah.
We'll circle back to that.
Yeah.
We'll circle back to that. So there's that aspect of
diversification aspect.
Yeah. Just like there are people who are like, I'm just buying more. I'm going to buy more. It's like, what I was going to say, and I want to make sure this gets said before we move off the topic. The .com crash, I think, is very pertinent for where we are with cryptocurrency, in that all the people who were betting big on the internet in the late 90s were right to some regard. That the internet was going to be a game changer, and they were 100% right. What you saw, though, was that in talking about that margin between what it can be versus what people think it is, that margin is too. So like the internet grew, and it was just like this freight train moving uphill that was moving to change the whole world. But it grew beyond what it was, and a lot of bad money was thrown at that debt, and then and a lot of these bad ideas eventually collapse up under their own weight.
Right.
Someone asked me, like, I think I really hope that cryptocurrency becomes the future for a lot of good reasons. The fact, but I am cynical, like Dave Ramsey's point, and he made another point that in the future we're just gonna have state-run cryptocurrencies, which is a really horrible idea.
Yeah,
which is sort of the way we're headed. And like if that's where we're headed, then that's a dark future, because it means that if you and I.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we've actually covered that before in a conversation between ourselves, where I see it the same way technologically, that because of the problems I've tried to point out with the integrity of the blockchain and these kind of things and disputes, you said you used the term that crypto is not autonomous. Correct. It's not autonomous, it's distributed, but the integrity of the distributed record relies on an authority to enforce it. And if there's a dispute, who's going to enforce it? Ultimately, people are going to reach for an authority to enforce their holding
Right.
whatever they think they hold, and that's going to be a state. And you're going to have to resort to an authoritative record, so that when the blockchain becomes corrupted and two people show up in a court saying, my blockchain's correct, no, my blockchain's correct, a judge goes, my judgment is this one's correct. And there's going to have to be a third party.
Which is pretty ironic, because the people who are pro Bitcoin or pro crypto, they're like, yeah, state actors are bad, but they don't see like that's where we're going. At least that's where we're going.
Yeah. So I think from a technological standpoint, it won't hold up to widespread use.
Right. Yeah.
When the usage of crypto becomes too pervasive in society, it will break down and it will require an authority to step in and moderate it.
So going back to that Dave Ramsey idea, because I think he's framed this in a way that's helped me think about it. But he said the reason why he doesn't like gold, and he applies this to crypto as well, but it's, if you look at economies like Venezuela or Germany in World War I, leading up to what, or it was after World War I, which caused the rise of Hitler, because they had hyperinflation. So when you have hyperinflation where a fiat currency fails, what you don't see is people trading blocks of gold for gallons of milk. What they end up doing is they'll just barter. They'll trade goods and services. Like gold is great, except
you can't eat it.
You can't eat it.
Yeah.
Right. But if you have I don't know.
You can't wear it.
You can't wear it.
Drive it.
But if you have propane, or if you have wood chips, you can barter those to get the things that you want. Right. It's closer to the economy of the real world people live in.
Right.
And so the thing that, and I think of apocalyptic, and I think that not that we should be fearful of this, but like if we go to the Stone Age, crypto doesn't help us, first of all, if our phones stop working. Gold would help us more, but as you said, you can't eat gold, and maybe people who are really wealthy will be able to get the gold. But the thing about crypto is, like you said, it's not local. It's not autonomous. The way that if I work for you, getting down to the everyday person level where we share goods. Someone cuts my hair, I can reimburse them somehow. And there's no way to do that without the, as you said, the kind of authority. So I'm hopeful, and I'm cynical at the same time, that whatever comes after crypto, sort of like whatever came after the internet was amazing and is amazing.
After the .com.
I'm sorry, after the .com.
Right.
Was amazing. That whatever came after AOL was amazing. And AOL, and we're standing on their corpses, right? That's the other thing.
Right.
Is a lot of these companies, they put all the capital in and they build these systems, and then they die, and we build on top of them like a city, an enemy coming through and burning down the village, and they just build right on top of the rubble. That's sort of what happened in the .com era, where all these companies, Pets.com, AOL, are relics of the past, but we built on top of them.
Yeah.
So crypto is instrumental, possibly. I hope that we can get free of the state powers. I don't think at least Bitcoin has that power, or has the infrastructure, because of their.
Well, I'm not trying to speculate on the future, so I don't have a lot to say about that. I just, from a technical standpoint, like I said, I just don't see it holding up to widespread use without essentially just becoming a state-run entity. Right.
And right now it is very mob-run. In other words, it's people think the price is parabolic, so that will, it's sort of like the run-up in the housing bubble in 2007. It's like they'll never go down. They can't go down.
Right.
And not realizing that's the very thing that will cause it to go down.
Right.
So going back to the pin, so what do you mean by the ethics of it?
Yeah, so the ethics of it. So this is something that's very important to me. The technological side is not very important to me. But this is very important to me. And I really think in order to talk about the ethics of Bitcoin, we need to recognize, one, that we are approaching it, and by we I mean, I'm talking in my context, so North America, first world country, fairly affluent, technologically knowledgeable culture. We're participating in all these kinds of things. In this context, we're so pragmatic toward an idea of an end goal in our lives that we want, that when something like this comes along from the culture, we just think, how does that fit into my scheming to get to my end goal?
Very selfish.
Very narcissistic, very just pragmatic, just pure pragmatism, rather than an alternative. So, in order to see those assumptions, so you can think of, well, what harm is Bitcoin doing? Let's just start by trying to build a really broad brush, basic idea. This is my opinion of a worldview that the Bible presents about possessions. If you track the narrative argument of the Bible regarding possessions, in the beginning, God makes heaven and earth and causes the earth to be productive and puts man in it. And it's very interesting to see that the first thing, essentially the first broad overarching thing that a person is given, any mankind is given, is a bit of land. Mm-hmm. Given land. And that theme recurs through the biblical narrative over and over. Abram, I will take you to a land I will show you haven't seen. Israelites given that promised land. Tribes given pieces of the land. Families given the land.
So God's in the real estate business.
God is the ultimate land baron.
Yeah.
And gives the land. Even so important is the giving of the land that in the year of Jubilee, the 7th, the 50th year celebration, land ownership is supposed to revert back to the family lines that God told the tribes were supposed to have this land. So if over the years, through whatever reasons it's been sold or whatever, it's only allowed to be sold in the context of knowing that in the next 50-year cycle, it's going to go back to the people God gave it to. It's not that's the only NFT in the biblical perspective is land. Yeah. That God's giving land, or let's even use a more generic term, God's giving a place to a people. Yeah. And for people to barter land is actually a non-ideal. It's less than the ideal. For someone to say, this is the lands God's given me, I will give it up in a barter, is an expression of a less than ideal situation in the narrative of the world as God made it. Instead, what the narrative is presenting is that there's supposed to be multiplication. Right. And new land is to be made to reflect the first land that's given. Spreading a multiplication, spreading of dominion and ruling to work and keep, as Adam is told to do, the land. And with what do humans barter, though, or exchange, or have economy, have a relationship with each other? Right. They barter with the produce from the land. Right. And it's even shown in the Mosaic Law sacrificial system. You never bring to God a sacrifice of dirt. You always bring to God a sacrifice of something that comes from the dirt. So God has given a land, and all we bring back to God in a sacrifice is what comes from what God has given to us in the first place.
Would it be cultivated land? Because it's sort of the assets that come from the land.
Yeah. Any cultivation. So whether it be animal or plant or mineral, whatever you want to point at, it's all going to be something cultivated from the land. So land has a special place among possessions in the biblical worldview. And interestingly, when Jesus comes, he also speaks of giving a place. Yeah. But it's no geographic place anymore. So there was a geographic place. There was, a divine authority given over a certain bit of land for a time, but that's revealed to just have been a parable of what was to come that was better, and to show the inability of fallen people and to even manage that asset. Right. We're not even able to manage our land anymore. But instead, Jesus says, I will prepare a place for you. No longer will you have to prepare a place. No longer is there going to be a piece of land given to you that you have to take care of. I'm going to go take care of it. I'm going to put you in it. And he says, I'll give you a place. And he even refers to himself at times as being that place in
Right.
a spiritual sense. So it becomes spiritualized, you could say. But there's a place given to us, and as disciples of Christ. And then what is it that we give back to God? It's what we cultivate from the place Jesus has given us. So I no longer bring to God a sheep to sacrifice or produce first fruits. I bring to God
Fiat currency.
No. I bring to God the fruits that come from being in the place Jesus has put me,
Yeah.
which is praise, which is thankfulness, which is the Christ likeness in this place. That's what I bring to God now in sacrifice. No longer is it in this world. And this is how possessions, I think, develop across the narrative of the Bible. Now, specifically zeroing in on money within that framework. Interestingly, money isn't really even talked about in ancient biblical history as such.
Yeah.
You don't get discussion of coin or money until the exile time, like going into exile, which is interesting because, but what you do get before exile, when there still is a chosen people of God that are given a place, whether it's in the different epochs, you got the Adam, you got Noah, you got Abram, Moses, and then the kingdom following. There is talk of gold, silver, precious gems, precious things. Even in Genesis, in the creation account, there's talk of, and the land extends to this place where there's much gold, and the gold of that land is
good gold.
gold.
Good gold. As opposed to all that bad gold.
Yeah, exactly. And this is not seen as a bad thing. It's not presented as a bad thing, and
Right.
I think that's right. That's why it's presented that way. That God has designed creation such that when we look at a piece of rusty iron ore, and we look at a piece of gold, we see a difference. There's a difference between a clay pot and a gold chalice. There's some beauty here. And the God's designed it that way, that there is to be a beauty in gold, in jewels, in these precious things God's put in the world that somehow reflect who He is and who He's made us to be, that we recognize the beauty in these things. There's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is, as soon as gold becomes money under a kingdom in exile, the Eastern Kingdom, to the east, always a thing in the Bible, what changes about it? It's no longer just a gold nugget, but what happens?
Gets pillaged, like it's stolen.
No. A gold nugget is not money until something happens to it. It gets minted with an image. It gets minted with an image. And before that, in God's creation, God's kingdom, there was something that had an image. And it was us. We were minted in God's image. But now we are minting in our own image, this gold. And the gold is not bad, but it's a graven image. And there is no such thing. There has never been such a thing as a state currency or any kind of coin or gold or any other metal, whatever, any other media currency that is not minted with an image. That's what makes it a currency.
Yeah.
So one question that pops up right away is, what image is on Bitcoin?
It's a dollar sign.
It's parroting the dollar sign with a letter B.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. How would you answer that? Like, what image is on the dollar? It's the image of America. It's got multiple images, but it's the image of America on the dollar.
Freedom.
Whatever. There's lots of images. It's a collage. In the dollar, but in the coins themselves, there will be the choice of some American leader on there or whatever. Buffalo.
So what is?
Buffalo on there.
I don't know if there is an image of Bitcoin.
Okay, so Bitcoin doesn't have an image.
That's a pro.
Well,
It's a leading question. Do you think that there is a?
So, does the U.S. dollar have an image? Is that a con? We didn't agree that was a con yet. I just said recognize the change. It went from being a raw commodity to being minted into the image of something.
Right.
when gold goes from being just, oh, this is a beautiful thing that we are to cultivate,
Right.
to I'm going to make an image out of it.
I'm sorry, so say your question again.
You asked, you said the leading statement of Bitcoin not having an image, that's a pro. And I'm saying, no, wait, did we agree that other currencies that have images, is that a con? We didn't agree that that's a con yet. We just acknowledged that that's a change.
I mean, most people think of money as not making a statement. Like owning a Ferrari, you're making a statement with your wealth.
Right.
Than you would if you just have money.
Right.
So that, like, money is like you have to have, even the Mennonites, the people who live out in the sticks who refuse, they still use money.
Right.
Presumably, I don't know. Do they? I assume that they use
My
money.
understanding is that they do.
Yeah.
Because they interact with the world around them.
So it's like it's necessary.
Okay. Well, is it really necessary, or is it just expedient?
Okay. Well, I guess it's very expedient because it's easier to.
Yeah, it's very expedient.
It's a store of, as they say, it's a store of wealth, or it's a store of debt.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about any currency, we are necessarily talking about something that bears an image.
Okay.
It bears an image of something. And obviously, like in the U.S., we have a variety of images on our coin, but they all have a common theme.
Right.
And that this is the image of America. Or United States of America. So, what is the disciple of Christ's relation to an item which bears an image of something? An image of, let's even go farther with the image. Let's just acknowledge that any of those currencies that bear an image, they bear an image of an authority.
Okay.
It's always a reference to an authority, every single time. Because it's a government. So this is such a thing because the image that's on there says it's such and such a thing.
Right.
And therefore we get quote unquote fiat currency.
And Jesus said, "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's." Jesus nods to the fact that the money is in the image of Caesar, and therefore it is right to pay taxes.
Right, because the image has a connotation of ownership.
Just give back to Caesar what's already his.
Yeah, so exactly. So when Jesus' main conversation about the essence of what money is, he refers to it as saying, this has been minted by Caesar. It's got his image on it. It belongs to Caesar. Mm-hmm. He says, give me what's mine, give it to him.
Yeah.
It's not yours. Mm-hmm. But insofar as what doesn't belong to me may be in my possession, how do I relate to that? So I'm in possession of some dollars in some way. Although a lot of them are just numbers on an app on my bank app on my phone, and I don't. Is that any different than Bitcoin?
Yeah.
At this point, to me, it's exactly the same. I have a password. I log in. I have numbers. Yeah. I have whatever. So regardless, there's an authority who's saying that what I have is what they say it is.
Yeah.
This is $1. I could take. Or this is 1 quarter. I could take the quarter and melt it down, and now I've got however much of these metals.
Yeah.
But the government's saying it's a quarter. It's worth 1/4 of the dollar, or whatever that means. Mm-hmm. So I'm participating in the authority of a kingdom, if we can just use these terms. Calling America a kingdom may trip some people up, but I don't think it's wrong. In biblical worldview terminology, any state or government would be a kingdom. Mm-hmm. It's some kind of a state entity. And so now we're into the question of what is the Christian's relationship to the state. Mm-hmm. With regard to Bitcoin, like we said, whose image is on Bitcoin? Well, it's maybe fair to say that there's no image on Bitcoin.
It's an anti-image, or it's like putting their thumb at the states.
Yeah, that's exactly where I'm going. So the Christian's relationship to the state, the disciple of Christ's relationship to the state, is the disciple of Christ's relationship to the state one of rebellion?
Inherently.
Where do you get that from?
Well, a lot of the time Christianity is maybe I should step back and say that the Christ's virtues or Christ's commands are inherently against the state.
Contrary to. They're I would agree with terms like they're contrary to, they are subversive, they are incompatible. Mm-hmm. But are they rebellious?
Not on face value.
What about terms like compassionate? Is a disciple of Christ to be compassionate toward the state?
I don't know. What you?
Is a disciple of Christ to be redemptive of the state?
I don't know. I think that it's often, as I said, it's often in contrast with the state.
It's very much in contrast, yes. It ought to be.
Yeah.
If anybody listening, if you don't see your discipleship under Christ as in contrast to the state, I think you need to question the quality of your discipleship under Christ. That aside,
but that's spoken from a worldview of where the state is always hostile towards God in the way that.
I don't agree, because in the context of money, which is what we're talking about here, we're talking about the state putting its image on something as an exercise of authority. So, is the disciple of Christ's goal to put any image? What image is a disciple of Christ trying to put on anything?
Christ's image.
Christ's image.
It's in the name.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different image. So there's a contrary image. And now I'm using the word image over and over and over, but in both testaments of the Bible, most of the time, the word for image is the same exact word as idol. So you could say, God created man as an idol,
right,
as an image of himself, or whatnot. So we're talking about the same thing. This is something that is a local manifestation of another thing.
So, okay, I'm not sure where you're going with this, because on one level you're saying, let's just take the U.S. dollar is the image of United States,
right?
And I could metaphorically say, like, it's like putting an American flag,
right?
As an American flag, each dollar bill might as well have an American flag on it,
right.
That Bitcoin is inherently like a rabble rouser in that it's like we're autonomous. We're just putting our thumb against all currency. The euro dollar.
Yep.
Whatever.
Yep.
So what's wrong with that? That doesn't seem like.
Well, that's where I'm pushing on. What is the Christian's relationship to their neighbor, to their city, the world at large, whatever state they live in? What is the relationship to be? My understanding is, I'm painting with broad brush strokes right now, my understanding is that it's to be as an ambassador, as a missionary, with compassion, seeking to call those who do not know Christ to come to know Christ.
Right.
And I don't see that antagonistically participating in let me divide it into two categories here, what I'm about to say. I think it would be wrong of me, while I live in America, to suddenly take all my money, convert it to any other country's currency, and then walk around and tell people, this country's currency is better, you should accept it from me.
Yeah.
That's not a loving way to walk through this world. It's putting a stumbling block that's unnecessary. It's telling America that some other country is better than they are.
But okay, hold on.
So let me just say, I could reference another state.
Okay.
I could put my connection to a different state and start telling this state, you take this currency, take that currency, whatever, and we start pitting these different authorities against each other, which is bad.
But isn't it? I have a friend.
That was one half of what I was going to say.
Okay. Can you remember that thought?
Yeah, I can hold it.
I have a friend who owns a construction company.
Yeah.
And his construction company is called Metric.
Yes.
Because the majority of people do not use the metric system in America, and his point is that the metric system is better, and that he's doing his due diligence to usher a new world order of better measuring, right?
Sure.
And so,
sure.
and by that him, it's you.
Sure.
So you're.
Sure. So yes, I own a construction company called Metric Contracting.
I think, first of all, the idea is noble, that you are. You know,
I think we touched on the second half of what I want to say.
Okay.
So the first half was, I'm trying to illustrate how inappropriate it would be for a disciple of Christ in one state to reach to authority of another state,
right,
and begin to pit that against the authority of their state,
right,
and to cause division, to cause conflict, to bring about conflict. We are not to be people walking around bringing about hostility.
Unless it's better.
Okay, in the case of metric contracting, as you're saying.
Well, but
with Bitcoin.
Okay, but hold on. Let me just make sure this point gets said. Like, it is the duty of, let's say, people who are technically savvy. We have our parents who are old and bad at technology. You're like, here, use this thing because it's better. Because we love those people and we want them to have, but they don't have the clarity of mind. And so it is. We're helping them make, if the metric system is better than the imperial system, then we should, even though it's, I'm just saying what somebody who would be pro crypto would say, and I think this point is true, at least on a surface level, that if it's better, then it's not that, it is a zero-sum game where at the cost of using fiat, we're pushing Bitcoin. I don't think if it's better, and we can argue about if it's better or if there are downsides or if there's like the devil's in the details, which are all valid things. But I don't think it's fair to say we should just not do it because it's making it harder people. Because now, coffee businesses have to say, well, now I'm forced to accept Bitcoin. Well, that's making the market better in theory if those arguments are true. I don't think that argument on itself, it's like, well, that's what our society does. We push things.
Let me say what the second half I was going to say, and then go into responding to what you just said. The second half I was going to say is, not only would it be inappropriate for a disciple of Christ to go around pitting state authorities against each other, it would also be inappropriate for a disciple of Christ to walk around in these states that we live in, declaring their own authority, in the sense of unregulated use of Bitcoin. I want to have a currency where I can exchange, and I pick and choose when I may participate in a state system. Take an example, which then gets to what you're talking about. If I'm going to go be a missionary in anywhere, and let's say it's a fairly undeveloped place,
Kenya, I don't know.
Kenya not quite the right example, but I'm thinking more like a tribal. Kenya's tribal.
Papua New Guinea,
good example. Anywhere in Papua New Guinea. Now I think, and I don't apologize for this opinion. I think the English language is probably better than their native language. Mm-hmm. Not because there's anything wrong with their native language, but because it's less developed. So it's going to have a narrower vocabulary because they have a narrower lifestyle.
Yeah.
And the English language is going to have a broader vocabulary because it has hundreds of years of very broad lifestyle, and it's morphed with lots of different languages influencing it. So it's a better language in certain ways. And obviously, they have a language that has accommodated their needs, and that's great. But I could walk in there and just be like, "Hello." And they say whatever back to me in their language, I say, hello. And I just...
browbeat them.
Browbeat them with my language over their head. Yeah. Completely inappropriate way to behave. If I'm going to go in there like Jesus, I need to make myself like them. And not only like them, but like the least of them. And I need to put myself in the lowest place as a missionary, as incarnating like Christ did.
Can I...
And I need to take on... But by putting myself in the lowest place, this is what that actually means. It actually means taking on their burdens. Mm-hmm. And their language is one of their burdens. I'm going to try to take on their language. I'm going to try to take on their lifestyle. I'm not going to walk in there and say, here's better clothes you should be wearing. Here's better shoes you should be wearing. Here's better language you should be speaking. Here's a better musical instrument than what you've got. What is that stick you're beating on over there on an animal skin? Here's an American drum set. I'm not going to walk in there and just be like, I know everything's better for you. No, if I'm going to come in like Christ, I'm going to come in there and take on their burdens. I'm going to carry their burdens. That's what I should be trying to do. And in so doing, that is God's design for how whatever I might say would have power.
Can I push back?
I feel like you're not quite hearing what I said.
Okay.
By coming into the lowest place, that is God's design so that whatever I might say would have power. And it is very important to me to say and to recognize that I observe that the professing Christians around me have very little power. They have what they say has very little power.
Okay.
It is derided, and the gospel message has no respect in the world. And I think it's because Christians have no power in what they say, because they do not take on the burdens of those around them and take the lowest place. To put it very simply in a broad brushstroke.
Well, what someone would say to what you just said about the Papua New Guinea, and I know this is a very, at the risk, and it is a risk, but I'm willing to take it.
Okay.
MAGA people might say America first.
Yeah.
Which, okay, but hold on. Try not to be offended by this statement.
Okay.
I have seen, so let's just take someone who is migrating up through Mexico. And that most of commerce is done in English. That by teaching them in English, on one level is narcissistic, saying that it is better, but you're also helping them, because the people who can speak English, or even two languages, English being the second one, it gives them power because they're now able to enter the commerce, right? Just like immigrants, that come to America and their kids that speak English, because the parents no longer, don't bother to learn English. The kids are the ones who are able to be the interface with the world. Or the parents, whether it's too lazy, or they're just they just have different resources. They don't. And I know, again, this is because at the risk of saying, like, America first, it's not that. Although I can see where you get the argument, but you might be helping them, because if, like, take the Papua New Guinea, if you can get Starlink, satellite, and that person learns English, the amount of knowledge that person's able to learn to become is very limited in their native tongue. But if they learn a first world language, that opens the world to them to be able to access the knowledge in the rest of the developed world. And maybe that's not the goal. I think maybe that's what you're saying.
No,
but I don't think it's an inherently selfish.
I'm tracking with your thought, and that's also in my thought process here. But I would say, I don't think that immigrants come to America from South America don't learn English because, by and large, brushstrokes, because they're lazy. I think by and large, people coming to America from South America are showing Americans how lazy we are. Well, regardless of that, it's very difficult to learn a second language. And
agreed.
It's not always in someone's calling or ability or time.
Yeah, and that's why I did make that allowance. But
yeah. So the language example was just one example. And like I said, I do think that English is a better language in that it's more full.
It's just more accessible.
It's more full than a language that's just had less exposure to the world. So, sure, it's better, but not better ontologically. It's just better functionally.
Right. Well, functional.
Yeah. So, I agree with you.
Yeah.
If I came into a tribal area and I took on the lowest place among them, and then I had, by that design of God, the ability to speak with power, and I began to say, there's stuff out there we could interact with. We could build relationship.
Yeah.
Big word. Don't forget it. Relationship. We could build relationship. And let me help show you how.
Yeah.
And I teach them some English, and they begin to interact. I don't see anything wrong with that. But that's very different. So, back to cryptocurrency, since that's our topic, what I'm poking at is, are people investing in buying cryptocurrency, whatever that means?
Yeah.
Because they're saying, I want to be making the sacrifice of inconvenience and financial loss, whatever it takes to help bring about this gift of a better form of currency to the community in which I live. I think that would be the very rare exception of the Bitcoin
It's
buyer.
most, well, I think...
Insofar as anybody has that goal and thinks that that's actually the right way to go, I have no problem with it at all. I think it's foolish because of my technological understanding of it and how I see it functioning and still requiring an authority.
Yeah.
But if that's their goal, I say, well, I get it. Then that's a worthy goal to say this is a better technology, a better thing, and I want to bring it in as a gift to 11 people around me. That's fine, but that's not how it's operating by and large. Almost exclusively. It's operating as I'm going to get around the burdens of the people around me.
Yeah.
So what I keep using the phrase the burdens of society around me. I'm thinking of things like taxes, inflation, abuse by fiat currency governments, all these burdens that people around me are experiencing. Why would a disciple of Christ say, I'm going to run away from carrying my neighbor's burdens? Help me understand that question.
But would it, if, this may not be a perfect argument, but let's say that the government is taxing people through inflation, which they are.
Yep.
And they're taxing people through taxation, which they are.
Yep.
That if you are creating a new herd and you're saying this is a better way, and then other people, let's say the least of these start joining, and presumably, let's just say for the sake of argument that it's not, that it doesn't, that crypto doesn't collapse in any way. But let's just say that it is the wave of the future, and then people who are rich, maybe who have wealth, they start going this direction, and then the people who are least of which start joining. It's helping them because they're sort of building this critical mass.
The problem with that is that's not how Jesus works. And doing so will only be done without the power of Christ.
Right.
And I say that completely authentically. That's what I believe. Christians do not show the world a better way by building a better country, currency, whatever. We show the world a better way by bearing the burdens of the faults of the world around us so that the world sees the consequences of their own sin. Let's just use biblical terms. A world full of sin and death, we bear that upon ourselves, and the world, by seeing that, that's the wisdom of God and the foolishness of man, is this weird inverse thing where we don't get, as a disciple of Christ, to walk around looking like the smartest people in the world. We look like the most foolish people in the world if we're following Christ. And that doesn't mean that I come into the tribal area and say, hey, everybody, I'm smarter than you all are in whatever sense I think I am, even though I'm going to be an idiot about whatever they know. But I'm not like Christ if I talk to them like that. I come in as the least and the least knowledgeable among them, and that's how I would have the power of Christ in me, working through me, to actually see Christ's Spirit work in them. It won't happen any other way. It won't happen by me coming in and just being like, I have the medicine you need. You don't know it, but I know it. You take it. Or I have the language you need. You don't know it, but I know it. Take it. It won't happen that way.
I don't know if those two things have to be mutually exclusive.
Okay. Mutually exclusive. I already said, if I have a medicine that I know a tribe needs, I don't think there's anything wrong with me trying to bring it to them as a gift. But I must, I'm going to quote Francis Schaeffer. So many pithy quotes from him. I love the way he was able to articulate a lot of things. And he had this phrase, he would say, we must be doing the Lord's work in the Lord's way. You cannot do the Lord's work not in the Lord's way, or it will no longer be the Lord's work.
Yeah.
And following Christ means that you walk as he actually walked. And Christ did not come and show the disciples, you must bear the world's burdens, even unto death, so here you go, I'm going to kill you. He didn't. He said, watch me, follow me. And he walked in such a way that he let his disciples be idiots around him for years, and he even took on their burdens by being thought badly of because of their mistakes. So he didn't come in and just correct from top-down authority. It's the exact opposite. He says, see, I have set for an example you should also do this for one another.
Yeah.
Taking on that form of a servant. It's so crucial, and that is the only way a disciple of Christ will do anything in the world with the power of Christ. Otherwise, as we see in our world now, it will be powerless Christianity.
It seems that, I had this analogy, and I've sort of touched on this analogy already, but I think it might go to your point, which is I see a call to contrast between boomers and millennials, where it seems like the boomers are very much in the protectionist mindset. They're approaching the last chapter of their lives. They're exiting the workforce, and they're all about, I use an analogy like toilet paper. In the early pandemic, well, it's a great analogy because what were people doing? They were hoarding this thing that was presumed to be valuable, and it was only valuable because people wanted it. It's just sort of you saw like when gas stations went out a couple weeks ago, people are like filling up those rubber totes full of gas, and then they're filling up plastic bags. It's a very cynical way of viewing the human race, of like, this is how we are as humans, that we are incredibly
all those bad things you're pointing out about the human race, those are the burdens that Christ is calling us to bear.
Right. Yeah.
Not to separate ourselves from, not to say, I'm done with this city, I can't stand this government, I'm out of here, but to say, okay, there's an actual burden that I can bear. Not a spiritual burden I can bear, an idea of a burden I can bear, but there's an actual burden I can actually bear with power.
That is an interesting conversation we could go because a lot of people that you know and I know, I've moved to red states.
Yeah.
Idaho, Texas, kind of being the chief among them.
Yeah.
And it's at least at first blush, it's like, it doesn't seem right. But you're like, why? Is it just like,
Well, there's no formula.
Yeah.
There's no formula for being a disciple of Christ. There's a relationship. A formula is contrary to relationship.
But it kind of gets what you're talking
Christ
about.
Christ can call somebody to leave a country, a state, whatever, and go somewhere else. But there's nothing wrong with that. But the question is, why? How?
Yeah,
what are you doing? And same thing, Christ could call you to leave one currency and go to another. But why? Why? What are you doing?
Yeah, Christ could call me to Hawaii. But he hasn't done it.
And Christ could call me to put all my money in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah.
Why? And all these problems I bring up with Bitcoin and not only the technology side, but how it's used and what people are doing with it, the point of it, and how it currently relates to those around me, I don't think I should be participating in.
So would it be fair to sum up to say that Bitcoin inherently it's a hoarding asset?
No, inherently there's nothing wrong with it.
Okay.
Inherently there's nothing wrong with the attempt to create a currency that has the most liquidity and ease of transfer of any currency we've ever seen. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that idea. I said I'm skeptical of the technological part of it, and I'm certain that it will require the authority of a state still to put its image on it and back it up. But I'm saying that the function of it, what it's actually being used for and doing, is contrary to the calling of a disciple of Christ and what those people should be doing among their community, the way it's being used by and large now.
Right, but
Now, here, I have one other level of issue with it, if you don't mind me diving in. I'm going to bring out a term I haven't thrown out yet, intellectual property.
Yes.
So if anybody listening understands what I've said about what a Bitcoin actually is, or listened long enough to get to this point, essentially I think a Bitcoin is a piece of intellectual property. That's what you're buying, intellectual property. And I don't want to get into the whole argument of intellectual property, but I want to point out that if it is intellectual property, it is then kind of in a category with other intellectual pieces of property, which would be like stocks, bonds, all these other investment concepts that we have. And in every single one of those, there's not only the buyer of the intellectual property, but there's actually another party involved. Which is the facilitator of the intellectual property. And we can even say fiat currency is intellectual property. We could even go that far and say my dollar bill, it's a garbage piece of a linen-y paper,
Right.
and it's intellectual property because it's a statement that says I own 1 unit of some kind of currency that this authority says exists.
Yeah.
So that's even considered would be intellectual property. And everything with intellectual property in that category has not only, like I said, not only a possessor, but it has to actually have a facilitator of it who says what the intellectual property is.
Yeah.
And if we just break down how these currencies, intellectual property, stocks, whatever, are facilitated, it brings up a necessary ethical problem, which is the limiting of it. It's the limits on it. So imagine a country whose king is Jesus, actually Christ himself. And he says, here is my currency. I say it is this. And I give some to this person and none to this person, and some to this person and none to this person, and some to this person and none to this person. And I'm a gracious and loving king. We're beginning to distort the character that God has revealed himself to have. In throughout the whole Old Testament, how many times does God show that that he gives a law that has an element of justice, but he says you're failing at executing that element of justice like me, if it doesn't mean that the poor among you are cared for. If it doesn't mean that. The reason that God gives an imbalance of wealth is so that those who have more can give to those who have less. It's in order to build relationship. I said a minute ago, that's a big word in my mind, relationship. If every single person on God's earth in his design had exactly the same possessions, then I'd say to you, hey, you need anything? You're like, nope. And I'm like, hey, I don't need anything either.
Yeah.
All right, nice to talk to you.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Yeah.
Bye. No, but God gives us imbalance so that there would be relationship.
Yeah.
That's why there's imbalance.
Yeah.
In God's good design. So I have an imbalance of more construction skills than somebody.
Right.
And someone else has an imbalance of musical skills than somebody. And I need the beauty of music, and someone needs the construction of a building. And we have relationship, and relationship is the goal. But in these fiat currencies, it is the godlike activity being performed of deeming that this person shall have and this person shall not have that's going on. And this is maybe a little bit of a leap in analogy, but I think, the term gambling around investment is often used. And people can argue about whether it's gambling or not. It's at least conjecture. It's at least a hope about future results when one invests. But I do think gambling is a valid term about it because no one knows the future. It's kind of
it's speculative.
It's speculative. Yeah. Gambling is speculation. Investing is speculation. So we're speculating.
Well, so
and to go back to the relationship thing, what is the proper place of gambling, or what is the proper place of speculation in building a relationship? This is super key. So if we're talking about the speculative nature of all these fiat entities, investment entities, where does that fall in relationship? Well, let's look at what kind of relationships happen in a den of gambling in casinos, in a casino. Or game shows, all these kinds of things. Somebody enters a place like that, and there's the facilitator, the house. There's the house. And the house has to portray themselves as incredibly wealthy. The house has to portray that there's this pot of gold back here.
Yeah.
And the drama, the allure of it is who will get it? Who will get it? And a required element is that it must not only be, it can't be by relationship. Because if it's by relationship, it's favoritism.
Right.
It's corrupt. So the game would be rigged.
Right.
If you have relationship in gambling, it's a rigged game.
Sure.
So it must be not only non-relational, but anti-relational.
Right.
It must be anti-relational. Because someone's going to come in and your relationship with every single loser is broken. It's a missed relationship. You didn't build a relationship. You didn't build a relationship. You broke it. You broke it and broke it. And then a winner comes along and, oh, this person, now we have a relationship.
Yeah.
And to anybody who actually has that kind of wealth, enough wealth, I'll put it this way: if you have enough wealth to speculate, you have enough wealth to give.
It's funny because I've heard it said among people who are at least skeptical of Bitcoin, is they'll say, oh, you invest in Bitcoin as long as you're okay with losing it all.
Exactly.
And you're like,
so if I have something I'm okay with losing, why wouldn't I be okay with giving?
Yeah.
Which one builds a relationship?
Well, yeah, and you're
Which one builds the relationship?
And you're taking a risk at becoming. It's like you roll the dice, and this $1 becomes $2, or this $1 becomes $0, versus giving that $1 to someone who
relationship.
Who needs
Which
it.
one builds a relationship?
Yeah.
If I am willing to risk, willing to lose, willing to speculate with this, why wouldn't I be willing to build a relationship with it?
Yeah. Well, okay.
And no wonder we have no power in our gospel.
Yeah.
Because we maybe Christians or professing Christians, they do maybe live a more responsible life, and then maybe in a merit-based society they tend to become wealthier. But what are we doing with that wealth?
Yeah.
And in the context of conversation about Bitcoin, why are people investing in Bitcoin? I see it as they're trying to evade taxes, which means they're failing to carry the burdens of society around them. They're trying to speculatively make a profit. Yeah. They're going to say, oh, I'm in on the ground floor.
Yeah.
I've got a Bitcoin. I think in 5 years, there'll be, for every one of me that has a Bitcoin, there'll be 100 that want it, and I'll sell it and I'll make a profit. Yeah. Or maybe not, but they're not building relationship. There's no power behind what they're doing. They're not accomplishing the mission of Christ for the community around them in that type of a use of Bitcoin.
So let me try and take what you said and put into an analogy, package into analogy, and tell me if it's completely...
Okay.
So take like two middle class, you and I are both middle class families. And so like, I'll use my wife as an example. She's looking at these freeze dryer, but they cost like $600.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's really not the best use of our resources, right? But if you see something as like middle class to middle class, in other words, let's say that we buy the freeze dryer and someone else in our community that has something that we want, they buy it, and then we share that resource. We say, hey, and you see this among like co-ops of like, you can borrow this and then you can borrow this and build. It's like a timeshare of, and that's what getting back to a robust community before, maybe before the Industrial Revolution, where that's where how communities existed, where they would they kind of like this fabric, they'd hold each other up, and that's but now what's happening is it's maybe some family that is really wealthy, and they have like an 82-inch TV in every room of their house, and everyone another family doesn't have a single TV, right. And that's kind of an old analogy, but it's a dated analogy, because it's like one level it's like one person has all the wealth and one person doesn't. And maybe they might occasionally say, hey, we're gonna have a ministry. We're gonna watch the game on the football game at my house, and I'll bless you guys with this. But it's a different type of sharing of the resources than where the other one is more like how maybe you could say how God built community to exist, which is that we should do this. We should share these resources.
Well,
let me add one more analogy.
Okay.
So there's middle class and middle class, and there's the middle class or maybe there's upper class that has all the nice things, that has the Tesla, and this person's walking to work. But there's another analogy, which is that you see that there's a need. You're like, hey, I have 2 baseball bats. The kid down the street, he doesn't have any baseball bats because their family's poor. One, I don't need to have two. I'll let him have it. That's another way of like not hoarding, not.
Yeah, it would be a misunderstanding of what I'm talking about to think that I think wealth is bad. In fact, I was trying to make that point at the beginning that gold and precious jewels in creation are set in a place so that we recognize that wealth is actually good, and wealth is part of beauty.
Wealth is a diagnostic tool. Would that be? It is to say it shows what your motives are.
I don't wealth. When I say wealth, I mean a measurement of standard of living or something like that. I don't think that's that shows where you're because I'm saying that wealth objectively outside of any relationship is a good thing.
Right.
And God has, promises in the end of the Scripture and Revelation are a place that's looks a little too much like TBN for me, but that's okay. I trust it'll be cool. So wealth is a good thing, and raising standard of living is a good thing, but the calling of the disciple of Christ is to raise the standard of living of people around them by taking those people's burdens on themselves.
Right. Yeah.
That is my calling. So I'm not to raise my standard of living and say, now everybody can look at me as an example of faithfulness and hard work so you can figure out how to raise your standard of living.
Right. Yeah.
That's not what Jesus did. He didn't do that. He gave of what was his, took of what was ours. It was an asset for a debt exchange, and I'm made rich by him being made poor. If you don't see that, you're just not reading the Bible.
Sure. Yeah.
So that again, this is going to come back to saying our gospel is without power because we're not living that way. Broad brush strokes of professing believers in my area, and I want to bring a gospel. I want it to be with power. I want it to be like Christ, and so I want to be a disciple following Christ. Now, in raising standard of living, so there's I don't know how much longer you want to go, but there's another thing. I think we've talked about this before. Maybe this is something I talked about with several of my friends. A way that I've come to articulate my understanding of what the Bible teaches right at the beginning, from creation being good and very good to fall. I think my understanding of is, and the way I like to articulate it because I'm kind of techie and nerdy, is to say that the pre-fall humankind and the way God built it before we chose our own way was such that people had needs and people produced things that met those needs. And so if we imagine a world pre-fall where there was one person, Adam, we could create two columns in a spreadsheet. On one side the need and it's summed up at the bottom, and the other side is the produce and it's summed up at the bottom. And Adam is one person and he equals a quantity of one needs. That makes sense. So let's say we can break it down. He has got 10 needs. He's got need for food, need for sleep, need for shelter. And you can go out infinity on those things. But you break it down and all those add up. They add up. This is 10% of my needs. That's 10% of my needs. That's 10% of my needs. And it adds up to a quantity of one need. Right. And his produce is able to produce, this is all just kind of hypothetical, but let's say he can produce 1.1 produce.
Right. So net gain.
So he's got 10% to show as abundance offering to the Lord for what God's given him, and he's got one that he needs, and his needs are met, and that's the way God has designed it. Yeah. After the fall, we still have quantity one need, but our relationship with the land that God's given us is broken, and we have a quantity of produce that is less than one. Right. And in God's good design, people have different abilities to produce. Yeah. Right? So some people, you might meet one person, whatever, for what it's worth. Elon Musk, he produces 0.99. Right. And someone else produces 0.1. And the aggregate of these two columns means we got however many people, we got that many times one needs. So we have 100 people in the world, we got 100 need. But no matter how high any single individual's productivity is, it's always less than one. Yeah. and it gets to the bottom, and we don't have enough produce to meet all the needs. And I don't even accept the paradigm of saying, well, there's a difference between wants and needs, because I think the Bible teaches us that if we want something, it reveals the fact that we need something. It's not always the same thing that we want.
Yeah, sometimes beauty is a want. It's a need.
Beauty is a need.
Yeah.
Beauty is absolutely. You take any prisoner who's been put in a concrete cube, and ask them if they needed beauty.
Yeah.
People literally go insane.
Yeah.
From deprivation of beauty. Mm-hmm. Beauty is absolutely a need in our lives. So that's why we need musicians, we need artists, we need doctors. Mm-hmm. So, but we can say, oh, we have mechanized farming. A farmer grows enough food for 100,000 people.
Well, that was and Elon
great. So he grows enough food for 100,000 people, but he still needs medical care, gasoline for his tractor, a machinist to build his tractor. As his productivity increases, his need also increased.
Right.
And we never are able to quite produce enough that we no longer need. So the way I say it is the world, our world, us in the world, we exist at a net deficit.
Right.
Not a net surplus, which means, this is what it means, this is what I wanted to get to. It means if the world around me, if my community around me, the ones whom I'm supposed to be in relationship with, supposed to be loving, if this community exists at a net deficit, the calling of a Christian following Christ is to intentionally choose to live in such a way that not all of my needs are met.
Right.
We do have societies in which people ostensibly have all their needs met.
Right.
But the only way that happens is by others around them in a lower class of society having even fewer of their needs met. It does end up being a zero-sum game. It necessarily is a zero-sum game, which is why we have the problems of slave-like conditions producing our iPhones.
Or even just Amazon, the slave-like conditions in their own borders.
In our own borders. Amazon, delivery. Like, oh, I need this, so bring it over. Well, I'm only getting my needs met at a very high level because someone else is going to need their needs met at a low level. And the calling of the disciple of Christ is to say, I'm going to intentionally, I see a need in my life.
Yeah.
I'm going to deny it. I'm going to deny fulfilling that need. I'm going to actually let myself decrease so that the power of Christ in me would increase in my relationship and love for those around me.
There's something that as Christians I think it's helpful to clarify, which is somebody who doesn't believe that there's a benevolent afterlife. Mm-hmm. That either believes in the afterlife but doesn't think that there's any good in it, or that don't believe in a heaven or version of heaven. I heard this analogy from Tim Keller. He said that people in New York City, and this is true of everyone in the United States, maybe in the whole world, have this FOMO, fear of missing out. I'm going to miss out. And I see this like just eating out. Like, oh, I got to eat that taco place because I may never go to that taco place ever again. Mm-hmm. And like the rest of my life is going to be like a tick in my brain. Like I should have, and I've had that. But if you're a Christian, you realize that the best days are ahead of us, which is what frees missionaries to become missionaries, to say, and it's easy, like missionaries up until COVID, you could go there for 5 years and then come back, but 300, 400 years ago, becoming a missionary meant bye forever.
Forever.
And it was okay because we acknowledge as, I remember, doing these layovers in Maui, in Hawaii. And you just walk for miles in these resorts, and they're just so nice. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're just like the amount of wealth that is poured into these. And I had this thought, which is like, I thought of the verse that the meek shall inherit the earth. Mm-hmm. That right now, the people who own these resorts or the people that enjoy them are, I'm not saying that they're not bad people or that they are bad people, but there's a lot of people who can't access this. And I thought about like that is, and I think one maybe downside of Christianity, we just see it as just not realizing that it's not zero carnal aspect. There's like, and we have to be clear that the things that the reason we go to heaven as Christians is because Jesus is there, That's the reason we go there. But that Jesus is benevolent and he's promised us a kingdom of wealth and and to your point, that these things will be restored. This inequity, we call them, but it frees you to say, I don't have to lament leaving these places, or the lament that I can't go to these places more often, like to the beach or to these resorts, because you're like, God prophesied, the meek shall inherit the earth. That it's actually the resorts in Maui or whatever is in the new creation, is laid. That is that, and so it frees you up to say, I can take the bullet. I can live a substandard life, knowing that not only that it's promised to us. Well, it is promised to us, but I don't have to live. I don't have to lament having it now.
Yeah.
But I think the reason, the term is popular in the last few years, but we call them functional atheists, who may be acting out some version of faith, but to your point, they're not. They're very much in a hoarding mentality, and it kind of proves, and that's why I just said that money can be a litmus test, in that it just shows your hoarding of the gold versus your opening up your hands shows your faith in the afterlife, or your faith in the God that will or will not give the earth to the meek.
Yep. If I could plug a book in the series New Studies in Biblical Theology, the NSBT series from InterVarsity Press, edited by D.A. Carson, there's a book called Neither Poverty Nor Riches by Craig Blomberg, which is excellent biblical theology survey, front to back of scripture regarding wealth, money, type of things in this vein. Very, very, very good. Well worth going through. Decent sized book.
I also, like, you use Elon as like a 0.9. I think it's higher than 0.9. I think he has like
more than one.
100. Yeah, he's got 100.
I don't agree. I don't agree that Elon Musk produces more than he needs. At all.
The richest man on the world.
He doesn't produce more than he needs. Like, he himself does not produce more than he needs.
Not exactly what he needs, but he does get. Like how many?
My point about the farmer is what I refer back to. So the farmer can produce more food than he needs.
Right.
But he can't produce more than his entire being needs.
But he can barter if you have 1 billion apples, you can barter the apples for anything, even if you take a hit.
No, because he can't give the apples for time.
Yeah, he can, because no. I heard a version of.
Anyways.
But someone else's time.
Right.
Yeah. So say I'll give you 100 apples if you wash my car. Well, that's that. Now he doesn't have to wash his car.
I'm saying that there are people who can exist with all their needs ostensibly met, but the only way it happens is by other people having even a lower number.
Agreed.
Of their
so
needs met.
If 1 billion people working for Elon and his empire are now at the 0.7.
Yeah.
But they're also...
So, and I'm saying ostensibly having his needs met. It still would be a lie that he has all his needs met doing that, because he would miss out on getting the need met of learning humility.
Well, I suppose. And like...
That aside, talking about it more in material possessions, someone could have all their quote-unquote material needs met, but it's going to necessarily require that other people have even less of their needs met.
But I also think that there are businesses, and I think that they're like synapses. They don't last for very long. Where they do tremendous good. We could call them, that they just, everyone who works in them are just like, they live large, their employee, that all the people on the pyramid scheme live large. The people are blessed, but it doesn't last long.
Yeah.
Just kind of like the idea of, it's just like the idea of America. Like, it was a great idea, but it gets corrupted so quickly.
I think that we are not rightly understanding the call of a disciple of Christ if we don't understand that we are supposed to see a need in ourselves, be able to identify it, and choose to not meet it. I mean, what does Jesus... There's an analogy that Jesus uses for the time between his resurrection, departure, and a future in heaven. He calls it fasting. What is fasting except failing to meet a need?
Or depriving yourself of it. intentionally depriving
Yeah,
yourself.
you intentionally don't meet your need.
Yeah.
So if we don't recognize that that's the calling of a disciple of Christ to fast, we're not recognizing what we're called to. So take me, for example. I do not have a lack of construction tools. I have opulent wealth in construction tools. The reason that I'm okay with that is because I have poured resources into and effort into getting these construction tools because I know that's God's calling in my life.
Yeah.
And then I give up time.
Yeah.
I give up injury. I give up my knees and my back when I'm old. And I'm working really hard to create something for somebody else because those tools are what I believe God has called me to cultivate with.
Right.
But I have lots of other needs that I'm neglecting.
Sure.
In doing that. So maybe I have an abundance of one thing that's in my calling.
Yeah.
And so, for example, a really, really skilled musician will often have incredibly expensive instruments.
And they're dirt broke.
And they're dirt broke.
Living in a van.
And that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Because if God's given them that gift, that's their calling, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Pour yourself into it so that you have something to share with those who don't have music.
Yeah.
Like Paul says in Ephesians, let the thief no longer steal, but let him work with his hands so there's something to share with those in need. And I need music.
Yeah.
And other people need buildings.
Sure.
And we need food. And so a farmer neglects his weekends, neglects family time, that's a big one, to create enough food so that we all have food.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been told this to myself, like, you need to spend more time with your family, Jeff. I'm like, well, my clients also needed their bathroom to work. And so I neglected my needs, my family's needs of family time sometimes, in order to provide a bathroom for my clients in the time frame that I'm hoping to
But you
provide.
could take 10% less clients.
Well, maybe.
Yeah.
But then my kids have 10% less.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Wow.
And done. Time's up, Mr. Barrett. Well, so to summarize, I'll try to summarize for myself. I'm technologically skeptical of Bitcoin. And then from a discipleship of Christ standpoint, I am going to push back on anybody participating in that, and I'm going to say two things. Number one, is your participation in it a reflection of faithful discipleship of Christ? And number two, is your participation in it leading others into faithful discipleship of Christ? So what I mean by that is, and I didn't flesh that out quite as much, so I'll just try to summarize it quickly. What I mean by that is, let's take a casino, for example. Let's say that the casino has some game that you can play. I'll just not even pick one example, just a game. And I am such a math magician, I figure out how to beat the game.
Yeah.
And I am going to go in there and I'm going to beat the game. I could do that in two ways. The first way is I could come in, I could sit down, and I could show the fools for what they are and beat the game and say, I have revealed your foolishness to you. And that might be a prophetic calling of a Christian to do. To say, I'm going to reveal your foolishness by beating your game. Or the Christian could go in there and say, well, I know how to get rich. And these people are all idiots.
Yeah.
Well, that's their problem. It's not my problem that they're choosing to do that. If someone's going to get rich off this, it might as well be me.
Yeah.
Which one is the one that builds relationship with those people and that speaks to them in the power of Christ?
Well, I know most people do is the second one, or the people who are doing the Bitcoin.
Yeah. So if I'm going to go in and beat some casino's game, maybe God would call me to do that in a prophetic way to build a relationship with them and show them the foolishness of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But if I just see them as, well, those idiots are losing their money anyway, I might as well take it and use it for God's kingdom.
Yeah.
That's trying to do the Lord's work, not in the Lord's way at all. So those are the problems I have with Bitcoin.
Let's talk about cancel culture.
Cancel culture. Okay.
So there was, there are been there. So here,
There are Ben for sure.
um,
You're canceled. Grammar's canceled.
I'm canceled. Well, the great thing is I'll cut this out and
Don't cut it out. It's human.
What a fool I am. No. So here's the question I'll pose to you. In the secular world, so let's just put aside Christian culture.
That's over there.
If you get canceled, it seems that it is an irredeemable canceling. like you've been canceled. There's no redemption to you. And I thought it was really interesting because Louis C.K., he had some scandal.
Yeah.
And then he's trying to get back in the spotlight, and the media doesn't know what to do with him. They're like, although he has a different brand, and he's like, well, and I actually always liked that he was always so blunt.
Yeah.
Even though that bluntness was depraved, it was like, okay, but he's not. So many of the people that we find hypocrites are because they're hiding depravity. He's like, I'm just depraved. And you watch some of his stuff, and it's. But anyway, his new brand is just like, I am who I am. And but here's the question: when you're talking about Christians or preachers or the people in the Christian subculture, which I know is a sort of contradiction in terms or whatever, but for those people who they get caught for something and they get canceled. Mm-hmm. The question is, do we as a Christian community treat them the same way? Right? Because like Mark Driscoll, he just started his new ministry up in. So there's like two parts of the question. The first part is there's always going to be certain people that don't feel like his repentance was full. Right. And I don't think that you can placate everybody. Like, some people are going to think that you were a wolf and there's nothing really you can do about that. Which I get, which is some of I see that. But, and then, so there's two parts of the question. One is, do we as a Christian community treat people just like the secular world treats them? Then once you're because there was someone recently who's trying, that was in ministry and was trying to get reinstated, and this woman who comes out and does a podcast, and she is insinuating that people like Driscoll, and she mentioned him by name, that should never be able to be restored. So is there a place back for redemption for people who've been fallen from grace, as it were?
Yeah. So Christian cancel culture. Well, I don't think it'll surprise you. My first part of my take on this is, the first thing I'm going to ask is, canceled from what? So different organizations, individuals, director boards, whatever, they hold the keys to some pulpits, mm-hmm. some media outlets, but they don't hold the keys to the kingdom. So when Mark Driscoll, I don't want to even pick on any specific person's situation because I don't know them, and I could have part of it wrong, and nothing that we say should be taken as what we know. This is a thing was such and such a way. But for any of these celebrities who've fallen from grace, they've fallen from a position within an organization, and they've been cast from that position. Mm-hmm. Is that the same thing as falling from a position of episkopos, mm-hmm. according to the New Testament?
Define episkopos. You can't even define it. Okay, Google.
Well, so I'm looking to pull up the Greek definition right now. It means an overseer.
Okay.
I'm not a original languages expert in the scriptures, mm-hmm. so no one listening to this should think I am. But episkopos being the word that comes to my mind, as that's the word in the New Testament that primarily is used to refer to the role of what we call, sometimes call these days, a pastor, whatever, which is distinct, even though it's conflated with the role of a preacher.
Yes, often it does.
Yeah. So Okay, so there would be maybe a community in which someone is seen as an elder or an overseer, or a bishop is sometimes translated, whatever that the case may be, and then and that's a relational thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a relational reality in which, let's put myself in a situation where I would maybe look to somebody and say, oh man, this person is a leader who advises me, who guides me, who protects me. Sometimes I'm not sure about things, who confronts me. And for a whole community, we all kind of collectively, oh, look, this person is functioning this way in our community.
Yeah.
That's only an organic type of a relationship that happens only by actual functioning and earning of that relationship over time,
Mm-hmm.
in functioning with wisdom. But then the place of being, a published author,
Yeah.
or being a celebrity preacher, also earned over time through building up a following, but no relationship a lot of times with your followers besides the public content.
Right. Yeah.
So these big celebrities, that's oftentimes what I wonder is, they have some public fall from a position, but what's going on with the people in their private circle who still think of them as, oh, this is a wise person. This person's I actually know this person.
Yeah.
When they have a public fall, do those private people say, wow, well, this person's no longer an elder to me?
Mm-hmm.
Or do those private relationships then, I don't know, what happens to those relationships?
Yeah.
I mean, I have some personal experience of relationship issues in communities, but so I could say from my own experience that it's complicated, but largely what I've found is that those celebrity personalities actually have tended to intentionally build their private relationships in order to have an intentional separation of the public function and the private function. So that if the public fails, there's like a protected private, which is why a lot of celebrity church leaders often have their closest relationships outside of their own church. So that if something goes bad at the church, first thing to do is run away to wherever, some kind of a respite. And this is just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg of unhealthy things in our modern church culture.
I haven't heard that, but I wouldn't put it past them either. But it seems incredibly. There's no skin in the game.
Yeah.
The whole idea of of church discipline is that if you sin against the church, that there should be a cost. That it's like a spanking. It's like a holy spanking. No, seriously, right? It's supposed to cost you something.
Right.
That's why you're not supposed to eat with such a one. You're shut off from this fellowship, and if you're not fellowshipping with the people that you're, it's like that. It's like that horrible. And this is a non-Christian analogy, and it's so that you don't eat in the same place that you go to the bathroom. Like that's the secular. It's like that's what they're doing. They're not. They don't have a vested interest in what they are.
Right.
There's no skin in the game. There's no. That's.
Well, and then the question could be, well, why is that the case? Why is there a prevalence of this kind of celebrity strata, and then the masses strata?
Well,
and that among the celebrity, there often is no real authentic relationship with the masses level that is of any, accountability level or any kind of a family type relationship. It could be, and there are even, pastors of whom I'm aware that make it a point to participate in very mundane tasks among the church and try to have an image of being among all the people and not being a celebrity. But really there's just so much function that goes on that betrays the fact that there's still a functioning cult of personality going on around that person. Right. So my first reaction is to say, canceled from what?
Yeah.
Canceled from a celebrity status, and are they trying to get a celebrity status back?
Yeah.
Or are we saying, that the people who actually know them have actually confronted them and said, "You've lost my respect. You're actually in danger relationally, and you need to follow such and such a path that because I know you, I'm pointing you toward it in order to regain my real respect."
Yeah. Well, I think there's two things that I think about. Or there's a few things that I think about. One is, I think it was more clear in the Billy Graham era. What's interesting is, like, take Mark Driscoll, like he, in the latter section of his time at Mars Hill before he was canceled the first time, like he made no secret that he was a huge fan of Billy Graham. And I think one of the things that Billy Graham's ministry, what they got right that I think gets lost today, is it was like, this is not a church. This is a conference.
Right.
Billy Graham was not, he was a preacher, but he was not a pastor.
Right.
And the word preacher and pastor just get like muddled. And in the last 20 years, it seems like those have been muddled. And let's be clear, they're not the same. Like, I like the fact when John Piper retired. He retired, 10, 15 years ago from Bethlehem Baptist. But he's still, we were like, is this it? Is he going off into the sunset? But he still did a lot of preaching. And I think that relationship is a lot more appropriate, because that's not to say, I don't think, that the gifts that can be used and sometimes can be distorted and can become this kind of celebrity model is wrong per se, because the declaration is a good thing. But I think you're right to separate these two and say, let's just be clear that he wasn't a pastor. He wasn't a shepherd any more than a CEO can
Yeah.
He was a CEO. He was a pope. He was a
Right.
And I think that part gets lost.
Like a king.
The other thing that I think also gets muddled is, there's two things. One is, the question you should ask yourself was his repentance full? And if it is, then and he's fully repentant. And this is why it gets muddled, because there are always going to be a subset of people who say there'll never be enough blood to atone for that, XYZ's the person's sins, because they feel hurt or they feel wounded or whatever, right? And in that regard, like, I agree to some of them. They're just like, well, you have to just like plow on, despite the wound, despite the naysayers. And I think that's some of their convictions of some of these people who are trying to return. It's like, I can't do anything about the naysayers. I've done, but the other half of that is, and we've seen this recently, is, were they as repentant as they could have been? It's like, do you go back to every person you hurt? Are you supposed to, like, at what fullness do you do you repent? And you know what I mean? Like, because I know that there's some people. I have a friend who to this day thinks that Driscoll's apostate, that he's not. He's still apostate to this day. And I don't know. I don't think.
Well, does your friend know Mark Driscoll?
Well, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where I just say
it's
completely inappropriate. Like, we already have.
Yeah.
If we're reaching a point at which we're looking at celebrities and saying they've gone apostate, the first mistake we made was looking at celebrities and saying that they were not apostate, because we still didn't even know them to start with.
Right. Well, we have a view of their lives.
Yeah. Okay. So when a consumer, a subscriber, a viewer looks at a celebrity who has erred in some way in their opinion and says, "Oh, that celebrity is now apostate,"
right?
It only betrays that the first mistake that person made was claiming to put their stamp of not apostate on the celebrity when they've never known them from start to finish. So we already have a problem of setting ourselves up as if we can know something that we do not know and is inappropriate to try to know. And there's no reason for me to even care to judge Mark Driscoll or Billy Graham or any or these people beyond reacting to their public work. So I don't think they're wrong with reacting to public work, but based on the public work, I can just say, this is what I think of their public work. I don't know them. I have no idea what they're like. Why would I suddenly... I was talking to a guy a while back, and I referenced a fairly well-known teacher, and this guy I was talking to just reacted. As soon as I said that person's name, this guy just reacted and said, "That guy? Seriously?
Yeah.
You condone?" Or he used the term, wrong term. He said, "You endorse so-and-so?"
Yeah.
And I responded by saying, "I don't endorse anybody. I just referenced him saying that his teaching on such and such had been helpful to me." And the reason that this guy I was talking to was so scandalized by that is because this person I referenced at one point had gone to some conference which that person spoke, and which another speaker, who this person thought was apostate, spoke.
Guilty by association.
Guilty by association. Yeah. And there's a photograph of the two of them praying together before the conference. That's it.
Yeah.
And therefore this guy, I can never condone this guy. And you just sit there and the mind boggles at the arrogance of someone from such a distance, non-relationally, to just be making these kind of judgments.
So when Driscoll was first canceled for the first time, John Piper in his Ask John, he was asked about this. And I thought he had something wise to say. He said, when a person's alive and they write books, you judge them based upon their life alive. But after they're dead, their books kind of they become separate from the person.
Right.
So you look at the person and they're like life of good and bad, but their books, they stand on their own, and if they have merit, then they survive. Right. Which is, ironically, Driscoll had this great saying that said, read books from dead people.
Yeah.
Because books that, for authors that are alive, you don't know how much of their celebrityness carries the books. Once they're gone, the books themselves are the ones, the content is the thing that carries it into the future. And I thought that was right. And I thought another phrase, and I don't remember who, it's Chandler that popularized it, but it was a Puritan quote that said, reject, receive, redeem, or I don't remember who popularized it, and it's like all truth is God's truth. The problem is the guilty by association thing, that if someone says something and it's true, we as Christians can take that. We don't have to say, but it was said by this person, and they don't like they drink Coke, not Pepsi, so we can't.
Right.
I mean, that's an extreme example, but but for some reason they're out of grace.
Right. So, bringing us back on topic here, the issue of Christian cancel culture, I'm going to say my first take on it is, why are these people lifted up at a distance so much when we don't even know them?
Right. Yeah.
We don't know these people at all. And there's nothing wrong with someone being an evangelist or a teacher or an author or whatever, and producing that work, and we can react to their work. But we don't know them, and we ought not to be claiming we can put our stamp of approval on that. And then when their work falls, if it falls for whatever reason, I think it's a revealing moment.
Yeah.
It reveals the immaturity of the following.
Well, okay. What I would say too, and I'll take this in a slightly different direction, but Scripture says that God disciplines those he loves. So the implication is that God doesn't discipline those he doesn't love. So take Rabbi Zechariah. And there's a man who lived a life of blatant sin, and had the opportunity to get caught and had the opportunity to confess, did neither before he passed away. Like, from what I read, he got like this weird malignant brain cancer or whatever. He knew, I'm sure the doctor said, like, you got months, not years. And he knew that these things were in the closet. And surely he knew that, and maybe he didn't know, but surely the thought must cross his mind that these things are going to come out. And he had the opportunity to come clean. And I think it's God's mercy, first of all, when someone gets caught for whatever reason. And shouldn't we, and then remove the celebrity layer, for example, because I know there's the whole like making man divine creatures, and that's very problematic, that we're supposed to be. Jesus was incredibly humble. He was incredibly fighting. Whenever he got fame, he retreated to the wilderness. Those are things that are the attributes of Jesus that any Christ follower should imitate. But put that aside. If you see someone getting caught, that's God's mercy upon his life, not judgment. Getting caught, Rabbi Zechariah, that's God's mercy. That's God's judgment, I think. Like the fact that he didn't get caught before he, that these people, and we don't know the hearts of man, but I'm like, wouldn't we take someone who's been humbled, who's been broken, to use the phrase, like, who lives their, lives their life where they're like, yeah, I made mistakes. I tried to fly high like Icarus and my wings melted, and I realized I was a fool, and God humbled me like Nebuchadnezzar. Right? That we should, as opposed to looking at that person with skepticism, we should say this person has been given a grace the way that a 22-year-old up and coming we should fear that the other person because they haven't been tested. That there is again, putting the whole celebrity thing aside, I think we should, as Christians, maybe take a different approach. As someone who is willing to, even despite their failures being so public and Googleable, like you can't hide from them, still being able to plow on despite, I think, shows a level of pressing on towards their calling, whether or not that calling has, maybe their calling should shift, and clarify the roles. I don't know what that means, for anyone in particular.
Well, so you were saying we should do this, and this is where I get back to saying, who is the we and what are they canceled from? Because in the first fall, they were canceled from their celebrity, and I'm poking at the fact that the celebrity status to begin with is the problem.
Agreed, 100%.
So we, the public who gave them the celebrity, should give it back when they make a public repentance? I'm going to just say, I kind of don't care. I don't care what they do publicly, whether good or bad. I'll risk whatever's out there publicly. I might see it and I might be like, oh, that's really helpful, or that's very unhelpful. But their relationship, repentance, discipleship is between them and people that they're actually related to. I don't mean really. I mean relating with whom they're actually in relation.
Pastor,
is what I should say.
Yeah.
And it's not my place to even start announcing judgments on that. I just don't know these people. So, like the discussion of whether people's repentance was good enough, I don't know. I don't care what they wrote. I don't care how good what they wrote was or how bad what they wrote was publicly.
Because their sins weren't against you. Their sins were against someone else,
Well, no. Let me finish.
Well, I'm having a hard time understanding what you're saying.
Okay.
Because like if there was evidence of abuse of manipulation of power, that's not
problem number one was lifting somebody up when I didn't know them.
Yeah.
Problem number two is that person's faults becoming known and me therefore judging them downwardly.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, you're like this then.
Well,
problem number three is me deciding whether to lift someone up or back down, still not even knowing them.
Okay, but I think you're intertwining these two ideas, and I want to make sure that I think these ideas should be taken separately.
Which ideas?
That one, should that person be lifted up again? And then the other question is, should we have celebrity pastors? So if you're like, I agree with you that I think there seems to be a momentum shift in the church, and you could say it's the work of the Holy Spirit that God is ridding the American church of their idol of celebrity pastorship or whatever. Like that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But that aside is not what we're talking about. What people are saying is whether someone who've fallen from grace should ever be in charge of the flock again, and that's the words that they're and what I would say is we should deal with these separately, and I think a lot of people have been some people have been disillusioned for sure, but there's others that realize that the folly of their eyes have been opened and realizing that we shouldn't have been putting a weight on their shoulders that only God is meant to carry, the role of celebrityness.
Right. Well, being in the public, there's nothing wrong with being in the public spotlight or being quote unquote celebrity. I think there's nothing wrong with it in the sense that if someone's given a broad voice or a broad platform in God's providence, if they have a gift and they have work and they're, like I said, producing books, speaking, teaching, whatever, that's fine. The reaction to them should be based on the work.
Yeah.
And if Billy Graham, let's not use Billy Graham. If some itinerant preacher is becoming very popular, going around doing revival meetings, and it just seems very blessed by the Lord and used of the Spirit, and the whole time he's got a harem of immoral relationships. I also think that's really none of my business if I don't know him or know about it. It's not my problem. I'm not supposed to send out a private investigator and find out. And if someone comes out and says, hey, I need to let everybody know that this person has this harem, whatever, and is in immorality, well, all that's gonna mean is he's gonna lose the power of his ministry, because his words are no longer gonna have power, and it's gonna have no power with me. I'd be like, oh well, I don't really care to listen to you if once I've found out that you're a hypocrite. I don't really care to listen to what you have to say publicly.
Yeah.
But neither one of those things are me saying, you should not do this. Other people should not listen to you this.
Yeah.
You need to stop doing this, or you must do this. I'm just going to say, oh, you lost me. You lost me, bro. You lost me with your hypocrisy. And then the moment if someone comes out and is like, so there was this celebrity preacher in his 20s, and he was really popular, and then he had a harem that was exposed, and now he's 55, and he lives with this tribe, and this tribe has testified about how faithful he's been there. I'd be like, you got me again.
Yeah.
I want to hear your story again.
Yeah.
And I might listen. Mm-hmm. But I'm still not going to say, you're back. He's back.
Yeah.
Stamp again.
Yeah, Batman is back, as if he's a superhero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be like, you got me, you lost me, you got me, you lost me, I don't know. And I still don't even know you. I still don't even know you.
Yeah.
I mean, what am I supposed to do besides either give my attention or not?
Yeah.
I'm not going to go beyond that. I'll either give my attention or I won't. And I'm not going to tell other people how to judge this person or act like I know the details of whatever situation. We can dialogue on the public matters and the public issues, and that's it. I don't know them, and people who do know them are the ones who have to deal with that. And this is very telling in the case of local church pastors who have a fall from grace. I'm still waiting for the day. It's probably happened, but I haven't heard about it. But I'm waiting for the day when a prominent local church pastor falls from grace and remains in their church.
Right.
But it seems to never happen.
Yeah.
And I think there's two reasons why. And the number one reason being the congregation doesn't want it.
Yeah.
People want the pastor to leave and don't treat the pastor well. Don't treat the fallen pastor well, or a celebrity, whatever you want to call them.
It's also, there's a great phrase. I'm going to try and say it right. You can't get a man to understand something when the salary depends upon him not to understand it.
Right.
So, for instance, I've seen this happen in a local church context where the local church has to discipline a pastor for his whatever. Mm-hmm. And then we remove him as a leader. But he's getting paid. So it's not like he can just cool guys, I'm just going to be a layperson, because he's a paid salary. Mm-hmm. And so what are you going to do? Well, it's like if you lost your job, you got to go get another job. The fact, and part of the problem is that it's intertwined with paid ministry.
Yeah. So
the fact that you got your paycheck from it, you can't just go be a layperson because you're not a sheetrocker. You're not just a man of the people. You have to go feed your family. That's something that you're called to do. Mm-hmm. So you have to go start, dating, as it were, trying to find another church home.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why these things are in conflict. Where money goes, control goes. Back to that phrase again. That you can't get a man to understand something when the salary depends upon him not to understand it.
Yeah, and I agree with you that this just brings up a whole can of worms of other problems in the way we think we organize our churches of salaried professional Christians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it just becomes a big problem. But so I'm trying to answer the question specifically.
Sure.
Christian cancel culture, is there a place for someone to ever come back or not? I'm just trying to kind of take the question and put it into the context of what even should be someone falling from, coming back to. Mm-hmm. Is this even appropriate? And I'm already, it's obvious that I think that the celebrity status is, the celebrity status itself is not a problem, in my opinion. Someone can become well known for what they do.
Yeah.
It's the people who become of that person.
Yeah.
And then I'm no longer of that person.
Right.
And should I ever be of that person again? I don't know if I should ever be of that person again. Mm-hmm. And so here I am hinting at, Paul and Corinthians talking about being of Paul, of Apollos, and whatnot, and this cults of personality. I just think step completely outside that game. Let God be the judge of each person. I'm nobody's judge, and I'm a finite man who only has my relationships. So that's all I'm gonna focus on. And the public stuff that's available, some of it's helpful, and I'm thankful for a lot of it that's helpful. Even from teachers whose personal lives I probably would really not be excited about as far as their maturity, their mm-hmm. teaching can still be super helpful, and that's a gift.
Yeah.
So in a local church, so I think one place we could bring this is, let's say I'm in a real relationship with somebody, mm-hmm. And that person, let's say it's a relationship with someone like you and me, like just a close friend, head of a household, whatever, and something morally devastating comes out about their life to me mm-hmm. as my close friend. In that category, morally devastating, I think it should be immediately clear to me that there is no one else I am more supposed to pursue and love and try to bring back than that person immediately. Mm-hmm. Immediately. To bring back to what? To relationship with me.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I'm not to their marriage, not to their place with their kids, not to whatever public thing they may or may not have had, but just a relationship with me.
Why not to their marriage? Why not to those other relationships?
Secondary issues. So,
well, their marriage, that seems pretty high.
To me.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, again, if I have a male friend, head of a household, and some moral thing comes out, and the wife just runs away, and the kids are like, Dad, we can't take it. The first thing I need to do is, it's just me.
Yeah.
I go pursue that person,
mm-hmm.
build a relationship with me, and the other stuff can be fruit of that.
Mm.
Oh, look, through whatever God would do with my relationship with that person, the marriage maybe could be restored.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm not going to go back and say to the person, unless you restore your marriage, we can't be friends again. Right. Unless you become responsible for your kids. No, I take on their burdens and I go say, I'm right here next to you.
Well, you made a clarification there halfway through, which is, if she left him, it's like, so crisis is coming to his life. But I've seen other relationships where a man left his wife, mm-hmm. and then the people in the community went start kind of did the mafia kind of like you need to God's gonna judge you for just this kind of it come heavy because they had this relationship and restored their marriage. But that what you said was kind of the opposite, is that he's do you see the distinction there?
Yeah.
So there's a tough love of saying you are in sin, you need to repent. I'm your friend. I'm the only one. I may be the only voice telling you that you are wrong in sin.
So from Scripture, what would you say are valid terms on which a disciple of Christ would intentionally end a relationship with someone? So it would tell someone, I have to choose to end our relationship. What are the valid terms for that according to Scripture?
Are you talking about the church discipline, the Matthew passage?
Not merely.
It's a leading question, so I'll let you answer it.
Okay. So, in Matthew 18, the church discipline laid out there from Jesus is go to a person yourself, seek to show them their sin yourself. If not, bring a couple others. If not, bring it to the church. Mm-hmm. And if not, have nothing to do with
Right.
them.
Yeah.
That's not what it says. Let them be to you as an outsider.
Yeah.
Let them be to you as an outsider. So they're no longer part of the family body of the church, but they're to you as an outsider. Right. They need the gospel. They need you to be a witness. If you run away from them, are you saying, sorry, God, it's up to somebody else to be the missionary to this person? There is no point of abandoning
well, there's talk about like not even to eat with such a one.
Right.
Well, that's a level of cutting off of.
Right, but that's we have to understand that in context, and the eating with would be the church family shared meal, the communion meal.
Well, still, that's pretty. That's a pretty,
so you cast them out from your gathering. They're like an outsider.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you see them on the street and you have to hide your face. Right. And it's just like awkward and we can't even interact. No, that's the person you most need to pursue as an outsider. Mm-hmm. It would be like, this is the person, one, of whom I'm most sure does not know Christ, of anybody. And two, that God has put in my path for me to pursue. Yeah. Like that person should be hounded with missionaries. Yeah. In my opinion. So I don't think there's ever a biblical point at which any relationship reaches where a disciple of Christ it can say, I shun you. I walk away from it, nothing to do with you.
Sure.
Now there are issues of false teachers. Yeah. Which is very interesting. So, what do you do with false teachers? Now, the interesting thing about false teachers is they're not by definition they're not canceled. If they're canceled, they're not a false teacher. Canceled by a true church or whatever you want to call it. Oh man, so this is an issue, a matter that's close to my heart and important to me. But in the story of the Bible, leader after leader is chosen by God and constantly fails at their role through Genesis through Malachi. Or through 2 Chronicles, let's say it in the proper order. Mm-hmm. And finally a leader comes who succeeds, and it's Christ. And fulfills those roles that the Old Testament spoke of prophet, priest, king. Yeah. And it serves in that place for us. And then raises disciples, sends out disciples to go from being disciples into being kings? No. Into making more disciples. Mm-hmm. Making more disciples. So the with Jesus being the real seated head pastor of his church, there is no longer a need to search for another. Yeah. There is simply a call to be a faithful disciple under Christ amongst other disciples. Yeah. So when a false teacher arises, the thing that grabs the headlines and attentions is, oh no, we need to worry about this bad teacher. Mm-hmm. The common phrase that I've heard many times is, people will say, at our church, the doors to the church are as wide as the gospel. Mm-hmm. Oh, but the doors to leadership are very narrow, mm-hmm. right? And I have always struggled with that statement, and I guess someone have to break it down however they mean it. But as I've seen it function, and what is seems to be meant by it, where I've been around, is if anyone's a disciple, if anyone's even seeking to be a disciple of Christ, mm-hmm. they should come to our church. Yeah. And then all we're really doing as leadership is we're looking for those whose commitment is to a more specific standard, mm-hmm. and we're calling them into leadership. Yeah. And I think that's just a completely screwed up way to do church. I can't put it any more milder than that. It's completely jacked up. Yeah. Because one, it's presuming that you meet that narrow criteria. Yeah. And I'm not ignorant to the Bible passages. I understand if anyone desires office overseer, desires noble work, and an overseer must be list. Timothy, Titus, list. I get it. There's these things that define what an overseer is. But they define what an overseer is. They're not the things that must be on a resume before I recognize an overseer. Mm-hmm. Overseers happen naturally. And when a false teacher comes, if you look at the case samples of it, like in 1 John, for example, the solution to a false teacher is not a true teacher. Mm-hmm. The solution to a false teacher is a faithful people who cast the false teacher out. That's always the solution. It's not, we got to make sure our teachers are only good.
Right.
And meanwhile, you've got this congregation that is the most immature group of believers ever, or even if they're believers.
Yeah.
Instead, the solution to a false teacher is we use the language of 1 John. We need to abide with one another. The false teachers are those who don't abide, and the true disciples of Christ, in 1 John, the great way he puts it, they are the ones who do abide. We abide with each other. It's a mature people is the answer to a false teacher, not a true teacher. Yeah. Jesus is the true teacher.
I thought a good analogy for that. Tim Keller had this great anecdote, which is, in the early church. Well, we don't know where Jesus was buried, right. And it's like, why don't we know? It seems like we would know, right? I mean, right. Isn't this kind of important? And his wife, Kathy, came up with this great analogy, which is, if somebody dies, let's say, one of our kids dies, you're like, maybe you don't, this happens to people, like they'll leave the bedroom completely untouched. Like, there's his shoes, and they'll right. memorialize
right.
the things that they have. And the reason why, but like, if you have the person, you don't memorialize them.
Right.
So you don't like, there's his shoes. You're like, we have him. So if we have Jesus, we don't need to know where his tomb was. If he was really risen, if he is really alive, then we don't care. It's like, it's just a place that he hung out for 3 days, where his body was for 3 days. Mm-hmm. In the same way, if this sort of like memorializing these roles in leadership to like call it celebrity pastorship, it's like, is it because like Jesus is the celebrity pastor? Jesus is, go with my analogy, but like, he's the one who takes that role, and by you putting him in that role, you're demoting Jesus, or you're not, so you're not giving Jesus his due by putting someone else in that role.
Right.
It's sort of substitutionary of sorts.
It is a substitute, but it's just it's the story of the Old Testament played over and over again, where the people, God says, "I'll be your king," and the people demand a king.
Yeah.
And so when you walk into a church and you see a heavy-handed, abusive main man, I've struggled with it, and in the past I've like, that guy needs to humble himself and stop. And I feel like God's worked on me about that and pushed me. And over the years, I think I've come to see, wait a minute, it's the people.
Yeah.
The people want him there.
Well, so there's something.
It's not that he's abusing them and that they're just like under his spell. It's maybe somewhat reciprocal, but a large part of it is the people want him there. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just going to say, well, then this is what the people want. It reflects on the maturity of the congregation.
Well, yes, it does. The thing that was interesting with COVID, especially here in the Portland area, there's been a lot of, so like Athey Creek, mm-hmm. They've been one of the people who've been more pushing back against I'm going with that.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of people that have been flocking to, from other churches and going to Athey Creek. And what's interesting about that is I've been there, you've been there. I have this analogy, which is inoculation. Like, if you've been inoculated, the idea is that you get enough of the virus that it's, and so people think that they're getting church because they went to a building for 2 hours. But I can tell you from being there that there's not a big emphasis on these things like community group. I mean, they do have them, but like, especially when you're growing that much, it kind of falls by the wayside.
To look at it as positive as possible, that's there, and the people who are choosing to be more mature can participate in that. But we have the public service for people who just aren't ready to make that commitment yet. And that's one way to think about it. But I agree with you in that's really doing a disservice.
Yeah.
Because it gets them off the hook, gives them room to say, this is my identity, I'm a disciple of Christ, and to not even live like it.
Yeah. It's sort of like, yeah, it's like when you do TurboTax. Like, I did my taxes. It's like I checked that box versus doing the hard work of actually, sitting down with a CPA and trying to. You've done it, but you're leaving so much. Well, you're leaving so much on the table, and it's hard. Like, it's hard to do real church. It's hard to, build relationships because you might get burned.
Oh, you will get burned.
Well, okay, you will get burned.
You will get burned, and that's part of the point is,
Yeah.
will you persevere through getting burned? And we have not, we as a collective Christian culture here in this time and place, we have not taught people, discipled people. We have not been faithful to be willing to offer what we have to offer and then still remain in an equal place with the person to whom we're offering it. What I mean is to show up to a meeting of believers and say, there's something on my heart I want to share, and to share it, and then to remain in an equal place with the rest of those believers in that room.
Yeah.
So a lot of the celebrity pastors, they have achieved some kind of a high strata within a church organization. They fall from grace.
Yeah.
They're out of there. Another person's got to replace them.
Yeah.
Boom, we got replacements. And if that person ever appears in a church again, it's only back in the capacity of as a preacher or nothing.
Yeah.
Because that's the identity that they've taken on. It's like, if I'm in a church, I'm the teacher. That's just what I do.
Yeah.
You mentioned Driscoll. You mentioned Driscoll. You see what Driscoll. And again, I want to be careful saying that because I don't know if he went and attended, if he's been equal somewhere else. But that's often how it functions. Is I'm either going to be. It's like you rise to your level of incompetency in a corporation.
Yeah.
So like a member shows up. Oh, now they're a home group member. Now they're a home group leader. Now they're a home group coordinator. Now they're whatever ministry leader, whatever head pastor. And then there's no back down to member. There's just out. There's just out.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But I am more hopeful that, like, we as the church in America are going through a violent culture shift. And I'm incredibly hopeful because I see what's happening. Like, I don't, these places, like these big capital C churches, like they're I don't think that they can win, and by win by their metric, and I think that's a good thing because it means that in order for the actual church to thrive, it means we're going to have to change. We're going to have to give up these idols, call them idols of what church is, and that's a good thing.
Right.
That's a good thing. And I think that whenever darkness comes, it usually means that that God is doing a work too, and I think there's much to look forward to, obviously. So.
Yeah, the one last tag I'd put on the idea of Christian cancel culture.
But I got the last word. You can't have the last.
Oh.
We can't both have the last word. No.
The other thing I haven't breached yet is the idea of why we don't cancel non-celebrity Christians when they have moral failings.
Why we don't Okay, so when someone
when Joe Blow, church attender, goes on a meth bender, or whatever. Name your moral failing. We just are like, Joe, just come on. We love to have you here. We want to keep having you back.
Yeah.
Why don't we cancel them? Because if having them there is us confessing them as our brother in the Lord, that's a high thing. For me to confess someone else and say, this is my brother in the Lord, a fellow disciple of Christ.
Yeah.
That's a high standard.
Yeah.
And there aren't very many people I know in my real life whom I confess that of. Because, one, I won't really confess it unless I know them. Right. And then other people I know, there aren't very many people in my life to whom I would be willing to stand in front of someone else and say, I know this person well enough to say, this person is my brother and disciple in Christ.
Yeah.
And that's sad, and I wish there were more, but I'm not going to just hold celebrities up here and Joe Churchgoer down here and take one seriously and one not. In fact, the one I'm going to take more seriously is going to be that immediate relationship that I have.
Well, that would be a good place to leave it for now. Great conversation. Can I plug your business?
Oh, yes.
I mean, I already sort of.
You already kind of did. Yeah, plug my business.
Your website is
Metric PDX Papa Delta Xylophone.com.
Xylophone.
Yeah.
X-ray.
METRIC PDX.com. I'm a small remodeling company in Portland, Oregon area.
Oh, don't be so humble.
I like to try to work out these principles of discipleship Christ in the way I run my business, which might be a future conversation of ours.
Yeah, which I noticed your website does have.
It has.
It alludes to some of these things.
It has some allusions to it on there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Alludings. And since this is a YouTube video, can I plug your wife's?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your wife is quite the successful YouTuber.
Yes.
Very successful.
She's awesome.
I'm not saying that she has billions of views, but she has a wide reach.
I'm not trying to say she's successful compared to others. I'm going to say that she, for herself, is awesome.
It's in providing incredible value to people who own Instant Pots.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's her channel's name is?
It's Indigo Neely, which is INDIGO, and her first name Neely, which is spelled NILI.
Yeah.
So if you go to youtube.com, I think it's youtube.com/Indigo Neely, or at least just search Indigo Neely, you'll find it. I occasionally reluctantly appear in those videos.
This could be incredibly damaging. People could cancel her.
Oh no!
Because she'll find out what kind of radical man that she's married to.
Yeah. So her viewers have asked her to interview me on her channel for a long time, and we've been a little bit reluctant to do it. But apparently she asked them at one point to submit a list of questions, and so she compiled the questions into a list, and we're threatening to some point.
Well, you could do a live chat. I'm not saying it would be good, but
I don't think that people subscribe to her channel to listen to me, and that's okay with me.
Yeah. But there's a percentage who are like, ooh, I want to know what.
Well,
I don't know what it is.
I'm not trying to answer the questions just to be there and be a face on the video. If there's some value in it, that's great. But there is I don't know what it is. And there's what is it like when you see someone famous and you're like, I want to know what their spouse looks like, or not? And I don't not to see because it's they're one, right? And there's something about not like a vain I want to know if they did they get a hot wife?
Right, exactly. It's not like that.
I'll say what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I mean that's what we're all. But it's not just that. It's just I want to know what kind of person because you're one, right? A married couple, they're one, and you're people who are watching Neely's channel are wondering what
I think instead of responding to that, I should say that we should talk another time about celebritism.
Yeah, that would be a great conversation. Yeah, I think that's especially in light of this channel because it's.
I mean, you trying to become a celebrity with this channel? And
I wouldn't go that far.
You trying to drag me into it by having me on here?
Oh, stop it! You put me up to this. No, no. It's interesting, right? It's because, and it gets back to this sort of we call it wealth inequality, with that there's a fame inequality. Mm-hmm. That in a perfect world, all 7 billion people in the world are created in the image of God. Mm-hmm. So, but why are we treating this Elon Musk is a unfair majority of the wealth,
right?
And personalities share unfair value of the. Yeah, that's a whole different topic, but we'll leave it there. So, cool. We'll leave it there.
Yep.
Great talk.
I'm hungry.
Well, that is today's show. If you enjoyed this episode or you got value out of it, you can comment or subscribe. Thanks for watching.